Do you know, dear listener, what is the fate of an abandoned dog? Despite his loyalty, he did not receive a crumb of food, and his body was covered with abrasions and bruises. At the same time, his eyes exuded frustration and rage caused by a sense of injustice. This is exactly how the middle-aged man, who was the main character of this story, felt now. He simply could not believe what he had just heard. The man in the suit happily announced that James Chun would be the first director of the new cardiac center. He hoped that Professor Kim would take good care of him. The main character was not at all delighted with this news because he hoped that now everything would definitely work out for him. Colleagues were also surprised that Kim Yun-chan was not chosen again and believed that he was simply being used despite the fact that this man was a truly good doctor. People also didn't like the fact that such news was announced at the funeral of Senior Professor V, which once again proved that if a specialist was from a provincial medical school, he could not hope for anything. Kim Yun-chan was very angry because for the sake of his career, he did everything he was told. There was no room for honor left in his life, and all this was for the sake of ending up as a laughingstock. Unable to cope with his emotions, the main character got into the car and quickly sped away to be alone. The man was not going to give up so easily and was ready to tear everything to shreds in order to show everyone how unfair Yan He was. Suddenly, the main character pressed the gas pedal with all his might, while mentally suggesting to his deceased colleague that we die together today. At this moment, something to the side caught Kim Yun-chan's attention and scared him greatly. Then the man heard a loud horn from a car, which was getting closer and closer to him, but it was too late to do anything. The next moment, there was a loud sound of two cars colliding. Bright sparks and debris flew everywhere. After some time, emergency services arrived at the scene to deal with the consequences of the collision. Kim Yun-chan, despite the airbag deploying, would have been unconscious and showed no signs of life. While the ambulance workers were bustling around the victim, the man thought that he couldn't just die like that because it wasn't fair. It turned out that Kim Yun-chan was still conscious, but his strength was quickly leaving him. Before closing his eyes for the last time, the man thought with regret about how good it would be if he could return. Suddenly, Kim Yun-chan felt a surge of strength and suddenly opened his eyes as if he was not yet ready to go to the next world. Looking around, the main character saw a sandy beach, which was located on the shore of an endless sea. Here one could hear the sound of water and the lonely cry of seagulls. The man did not understand where he was, but immediately noticed that he somehow did not die. The main character continued to look around because this place seemed very familiar to him. Suddenly, someone called the man by name, trying to get his attention. Kim Yun-chan didn't understand what happened. A group of young people approached the main character, asking him with bewilderment why he froze in place and asking him to quickly turn on the camera and come to him. Kim Yun-chan was very surprised because these people were his friends who looked much younger. The man did not understand whether it was a dream or a hallucination. In the end, the main character picked up an old camera while continuing to think about what was happening to him. It was not for nothing that all this seemed very familiar to the man, because everything that was happening now reminded him exactly of his graduation 20 years ago. After some time, Kim Yun-chan and his friends returned to the private houses that had been rented specifically for the celebration of this event. The company of young people was having fun and relaxing, anticipating how their lives would change after this day. Only the main character remained thoughtful and detached. He recalled that his friend Lee Taek-jin had complained about the future that evening. The boy was afraid that being an intern would be much more difficult than being a student. To this, Baek Chang-hyun advised his comrade to forget about all the worries for a while, because today they were only supposed to have fun. Kim Yun-chan was sure that 20 years ago, everything happened exactly the same way. The main character himself understood that it sounded absurd, but the assumption that he had returned to the past was confirmed. The man recalled that when he was dying, he saw a light in the semi-darkness. At that moment, he wished to return. Kim Yun-chan could hardly contain his emotions because he understood that if his wish really came true, then he had an incredible opportunity. Now he was in his past, but he had 20 years of experience and enormous knowledge. The main character was sure that now he would be able to take revenge on Han Sang Hun. This time, Kim Yun-chan wanted him to be the one to use this scoundrel. While Kim Yun-chan was thinking about all this, his friends began to worry about where the rest of their comrades had disappeared to, who had gone shopping, and should have returned by now. At that moment, the front door opened with a bang. This suddenness frightened our heroes, so they looked forward sharply. In front of them, they saw a worried Han Min-soo. The guy was carrying his girlfriend on his back and loudly asking the others for help. No one understood what had happened. Han Min-soo said that he and the girl almost reached home, but then it suddenly became dark and he drove into a fence, after which the engine stalled. Kim Yun-chan was shocked by what was happening and did not understand how this could happen because he knew for sure that this did not happen last time. However, the main character quickly pulled himself together when he remembered about Yin Xiad. The girl probably needed medical attention. She was conscious, and her complexion and breathing were normal. Kim Yun-chan understood that a detailed examination was required, but he could already assume that the girl had only minor bruises. At the same time, something was wrong with Han Min-soo. The main character immediately noticed that the guy had difficulty breathing and that he had turned very pale. Without wasting any time, Kim Yun-chan put his ear to his friend's chest to listen to his heartbeat. He could barely hear the victim's heartbeat. The heart sounds were very muffled. Suddenly, Han Min-soo, exhausted, said in a voice that it was somehow uncomfortable for him to breathe. Hearing this, the main character quickly asked the guy not to say anything and lie down on the floor. Lee Taek-jin and Baek Chang-hyun didn't yet know what was happening to their friend, but what they soon saw shocked them. Han Min-soo began to scream loudly in pain, which really scared everyone present. Without thinking twice, one of the guys suggested calling the emergency services. Meanwhile, Kim Yun-chan continued to analyze his friend's condition. The guy realized that it was more painful for the victim to lie on the floor than to sit. This gave him an idea. In order to test his guess, the protagonist quickly unbuttoned Han Min-soo's shirt and discovered large bruises on his chest and back. Also, right now the guy had a swollen jugular vein. Kim Yun-chan understood perfectly well what these symptoms were talking about and what consequences awaited him ahead, so the guy hesitated for a moment. Quickly pulling himself together, the protagonist asked Yong Yun-si took off her stocking and used it as a bandage to maintain Han Min-soo's blood pressure. Suddenly, Baek Chang-hyun gave very bad news. It turned out that the emergency services would only be able to arrive in an hour because they were now too far away. Along the way, Kim Yun-chan heard that one of his comrades was talking on the phone with a professor to get advice, but due to excitement, he could not clearly explain what happened. In the end, Kim Yun-chan snatched the phone and quickly told everything he had learned about Han Min-soo's condition. The man was very alarmed by everything he heard because he understood that all of what was described were very serious symptoms. Soon the professor asked the main character to measure the pulse on the victim's wrist for 15 seconds and then multiply the resulting number by 4. It turned out that Han Min-soo now had a pulse of 180 beats per minute. The professor, hearing this, began to mentally collect all the symptoms in order to make the correct diagnosis. The man soon realized with horror that Han Min-soo had cardiac tamponade, a condition in which the heart puts pressure on itself, causing a decrease in cardiac output. Kim Yun-chan, although he didn't know it yet, already understood that the situation was very serious. The guy was very afraid that if they didn't do anything right now, Han Min-soo would very likely die. The professor asked the protagonist not to hang up and stay in touch while he tried to request a helicopter from the local police department via his home phone. At the same time, Kim Yun-chan, out of despair, began to suggest that all this was happening because he did not die, but returned to the past. Soon the professor regretfully announced that it would not be possible to send a helicopter. It was very painful for the main character to hear this. The man continued to say that the young people should have simply waited for the ambulance to arrive, however. Kim Yun-chan did not agree with this because he believed that the ambulance would arrive too late and would not have time to save his friend. Now the guy was ready to take desperate measures. The protagonist could not let Han Min-soo die, so he confidently told the professor that he would try pericardiocentesis. The man was shocked by what he heard and for some time simply could not utter a word. Right now, Han Min-soo's pericardial effusion was much higher than normal due to the shock condition. To help with this, a pericardiocentesis had to be performed. Usually this procedure was carried out using ultrasound, since it was too dangerous to carry out this operation relying only on intuition. The professor, hearing about Kim Yun-chan's intentions, was shocked because even he had a hard time seeing her off blindly, let alone his inexperienced student. The protagonist understood the man's reaction, but insisted that there was no other option. In his opinion, the ambulance would definitely not be able to arrive on time. Han Min-soo was now unconscious, and his face continued to grow paler. Literally every second counted. Luckily, our heroes were now in the house, and the first aid kit contained the appropriate tools. Kim Yun-chan asked his professor to help him and promised to strictly follow his instructions. For a while, the man was silent. His tightly clenched fist clearly demonstrated that he categorically disagreed with the main character. Be that as it may, the professor could not find another solution to the current situation, and therefore he had to agree with the guy. The first thing the man asked was for Kim Yun-chan to disinfect the victim's entire chest. Also, everyone except the assistant should step aside and not interfere. Next, the professor asked the guy to find Han Min-sun's xiphoid process, which was a small protrusion between the lower ribs and was located a couple of centimeters under the collarbone. From this moment on, the most difficult part began. The main character should not, under any circumstances, touch the intercostal arteries that passed between the ribs. Kim Yun-chan had to insert the needle at a 30-degree angle directly under the protrusion he found. The professor warned that if the needle got stuck, it had to be pulled out immediately. Kim Yun-chan understood everything and, despite his excitement, was ready to start working. The guy knew very well that he needed to concentrate on the pads of his fingers. During his career, he had already performed this operation more than 1,000 times. Now Han Min-sun's life was completely in the hands of the protagonist. For a while, there was absolute silence, which was very disturbing to everyone present. The professor was also very nervous because for these few seconds he did not receive any information from his student and was completely in the dark. Meanwhile, Kim Yun-chan carefully ran his fingers over Han Min-sun's chest to find the right spot. Suddenly, the boy felt a strong sense of anxiety and his heart began to beat faster. It turned out that the main character managed to find the xiphoid process. He was absolutely sure that he could hit it with a needle. Kim Yun-chan clearly felt how the sharp needle penetrated the victim's body and already understood how it would all end. Suddenly, the guy began to use a syringe to pump out a strange liquid from Han Min-sun's heart that was unlike anything else. At that moment, Kim Yun-chan breathed a sigh of relief and began to smile widely as if he saw a good sign for himself. Then the main character loudly and with great joy informed his professor that he had succeeded. The man was shocked by what he heard and did not even immediately believe in the success of the operation. Then Kim Yun-chan said that the syringe was filled with a light-colored liquid. This meant that the needle entered correctly, which could not but please our heroes. The professor was very surprised that his student managed to do everything quickly and cleanly, despite the fact that this operation was carried out blindly. For a moment, it seemed to the man that it was simply impossible to do something like this without experience. That is why the professor became very interested in Kim Yun-chan, who had not stood out from the others before. The man began to think that the main character was definitely not an ordinary guy. Yonhee University College of Medicine. In his past life, the guy had to flatter the professors in every possible way to get here. This time, everything was different. The protagonist was confident that thanks to Professor Han Sang Hun's recommendation, he could easily become an intern here. Lee Taek-jin was already dissatisfied with the fact that people around him couldn't take their eyes off them and treated them with disdain just because he and Kim Yun-chan weren't graduates of Yonhee University. The guy continued to complain for some time, but the main character did not listen to him and was completely immersed in his thoughts. Kim Yun-chan looked at the surroundings and thought that, perhaps because of the pride of being the best medical school in Korea, all these people were very attached to Yonhee University. The interns immediately noticed our heroes. They didn't know who they were, so they realized that the guys were from another university. The main character already understood that, in order to survive in such a fierce rivalry in this life, he needed to rely on one specific person. This man was a guy named Kim Gwi Nam, who, like Kim Yun-chan, had just entered the internship. The family of this seemingly inconspicuous guy had great influence in the legal and medical fields. In words and in deeds, it was a truly royal family. The protagonist knew very well that in the future, Kim Gwi Nam would become strong enough to restrain Han Sang Hun, so this guy had to be captured as soon as possible. Kim Yun-chan was surprised that the guy he knew in his past life didn't have any wrinkles yet and looked happy and innocent. The main character was sure that he would get closer to Kim Gwi. It would be easy for us, so having collected my thoughts, I decided to intervene in the conversation about Professor Han Sang Hun. Unexpectedly for the guy and his interlocutor, the main character loudly declared that Professor Han Sang Hun had been working as a cardiac surgeon for the 2nd year already. The guy also said that the man was born in Seoul, graduated from a prestigious high school, and graduated with honors from Yonhee University. Kim Gwi Nam was surprised to hear such details about his idol, and therefore asked if the main character was familiar with Professor Sang Hun. Kim Yun-chan replied that he had simply done some research on the topic beforehand. At the same time, the guy was mentally glad that Kim Gwi Nam, as expected, had fallen for his trick. Then the main character suggested that the guy meet him in his room a little later and talk about Professor Kim Gwi Nam was very glad to hear this. Without wasting any time, the guy introduced himself and extended his hand to his new acquaintance. GWI, without hesitation, Nama was confident that he had already left a good impression on the guy. After this, the interns went inside the building because new duties awaited them. As soon as everyone had gathered, it was announced that the young people would now begin drawing lots for the internship shift schedule. When the intern's name was called, he had to go to the platform and pull out one of the balls. Kim Yun-chan was fully focused and thought that he finally had the opportunity to try his luck on the 9th lot for the internship schedule. The internship lasted for a year starting in March. Interns will need to change the departments they work in every month. It was impossible to visit all departments in a year because the interest in different departments created a strong imbalance, which was very difficult to get rid of. So the solution was to draw lots. The worst option for an intern was to end up in the emergency room. This place was considered hell due to the lack of people and changing priorities depending on the patient's condition. In his past life, the main character spent 2 months in this department and was assigned there right before his entrance exams for residency. When the guy's name was called, he approached the platform already knowing that there were only 2 balls left there. The main character was sure that if nothing changed, he would return to the same department. Kim Yun-chan, without thinking twice, reached for the yellow ball as if he knew what the result would be. Suddenly, the guy changed his mind and grabbed the red ball tightly. Soon, the main character was already looking at his schedule with a smile. It turned out that Kim Yun-chan had chosen the best schedule for himself, which consisted of working in the most basic departments. Kim GWI Nam was very envious of the main character because he himself had to work in the emergency room and thoracic surgery, and all this before the exam. Initially, this schedule was destined for Kim Yun-chan, so he understood the feelings of his new acquaintance well. The main character decided to take advantage of this situation in order to get even closer to Kim GWI, Namu. The next moment, Kim Yun-chan suddenly suggested that the guy switch schedules, which could not help but surprise Kim GWI, Nama. The guy couldn't believe what he heard, and then Kim Yun-chan explained that he was actually planning to enroll in thoracic surgery, so experience working in this department wouldn't hurt him. This was the main character's cunning plan. He was ready to exchange schedules during their appointed meeting. Now the guy was sure that he had completely won Kim Gui's trust and favor. Nama. Now the guy was almost crying from happiness and looked at Kim Yun-chan as if he had saved his life. At the same time, the main character suddenly felt awkward because he did not expect such a reaction at all. Kim Ji-do-wai Nam held his new friend's hand and said that he would never forget his kindness. The guy also promised to treat the main character to something tasty when he came to Seoul. On top of that, the guy said that next month he would have a birthday, which Kim Yun-chan could come to. The main character thought that Kim GWE Nam was taking his good deed too seriously. One of Kim Yun-chan's main goals during his internship was to meet Kim GWE Nam, who was one of the members of the royal family. Very soon, the main character managed to do this. After a short conversation, the guys exchanged their numbers. It soon became clear that Kim GWI Nam and Kim Yun-chan would be sharing a room during their internship. The unexpectedly joyful guy suggested that the main character communicate as equals, since they were the same age after all. Kim Yun-chan was taken aback by this proposal, and overall felt a little awkward due to the genuine sincerity of his new acquaintance. In the end, the main character agreed, still not believing that he could just become Kim Gui's friend, Nama, after they exchanged schedules. In his past life, the guy could not even imagine that he could become a close friend to someone like Kim GWI, Nama. All this was in the past, and now Kim Yun-chan had no intention of repeating his previous life path. Some of the darkest days of the doctor's life were during his internship. Since this was the main character's first practical experience, he was constantly scolded. A shower and 3 meals a day became a real luxury, and sleeping on benches became a routine for Kim Yun-chan. To be under endless pressure from a deadly amount of work, and at the same time to carry out all the little errands and much more. This is what it meant to be an intern. That is why the training center for interns provided practical training on how to survive in these harsh conditions. The first thing the young specialist had to do was learn how to take blood from a vein for analysis. To do this, the interns split into pairs. After the arm was disinfected, one of the guys quickly inserted the needle into his partner's vein. Since everything was done correctly, the syringe began to quickly fill with blood, which could now be examined. Kim Yun-chan was surprised that his friend was able to perform the procedure again. A happy Lee Taek-jin claimed that it was a matter of practice and gaining experience. The main character was happy for his friend because he remembered well how before the regression, the guy constantly complained and suffered because he could not do anything right. Kim Yun-chan decided to support his friend by saying that he would be able to achieve greater success if he continued to practice. Lee Taek-jin found these words very suspicious. The guy then asked if they really should be practicing the probing procedure now. Kim Yun-chan began to get noticeably nervous upon hearing this. Gastric probing is a procedure in which a full tube is passed through the nose into a person's stomach. Because it was very long and had to go into the stomach, it was quite a complicated procedure. Of course, the main character was not bothered by the complexity of this procedure, but by something else. The thing was that now, the guy was about to meet that same professor, Han Sang Hun. Han Sang Hun came out to the interns and introduced himself and said that today he was responsible for teaching gastric catheterization. While the man was saying all this, Kim Yun-chan was looking at him intently and could hardly contain his emotions. The face of this professor reminded the main character of all the humiliations he had to go through over the past 20 years. So now, it was very difficult for him to control himself. Meanwhile, Han Sang Hun had already finished his welcoming speech and turned to the interns and asked if any of them wanted to try the procedure. In response to this, the man heard only absolute silence. The young specialist fearfully looked away so as not to attract the professor's attention. Han Sang Hun realized that he wouldn't be able to wait for a volunteer, so he already took out a list to choose a candidate. Just at that moment, 2 hands suddenly rose up, indicating that the volunteers had already been found. Kim Yun-chan held his friend's hand and turned to the professor, confidently stating that they would like to try this procedure. Lee Taek-jin was shocked by this because no one expected that he would have to participate in something like this now. The guy immediately started to get indignant, but the main character asked him not to be afraid and promised that it wouldn't hurt. Han Sang Hun was glad that there were a couple of brave people among the interns, and with a smile he invited them to come to him. Kim Gi-dwi-nam was delighted with the protagonist's actions and supported him with all his might. Coming closer and closer to the professor, Kim Yun-chan's face suddenly changed and he began to look very serious. Suddenly, the boy quickened his steps, as if he intended to approach Han Sang Hun faster. At that moment, the man realized that something was wrong with his student, which is why he became noticeably tense. The next moment, the main character grabbed the professor by the clothes and began loudly accusing him of destroying people's lives with a smile on his face. While the other interns tried to calm Kim Yun-chan down, he continued to state that he would not tolerate the theft of his papers, his internship, or even his position as head of the cardiac surgery center. The main character, with malice in his voice, threatened to go over heads to achieve his goals and insisted that this time that head would be Han Sang Hun. Of course, this whole scene was happening only in Kim Yun-chan's thoughts. Outwardly, the guy remained just as focused, although slightly worried. Meanwhile, Professor Han Sang Hun had already prepared everything necessary for the procedure and announced that Kim Yun-chan would be the one to demonstrate how it was done. The man then handed the protagonist a sealed hollow tube, giving him the opportunity to show off his skills. At the same time, the guy was glad that he was able to contain his emotions and consider that now the most important thing for him was to leave a good impression, soon to be a stepping stone on his way up this time. Very soon, a hollow probing tube was inserted into Lee Taek-jin's nose, causing him discomfort. The guy claimed that it was painful, but Kim Yun-chan continued the procedure, asking his friend to endure it a little longer. Soon the main character asked the guy to take a sip, which was supposed to be the final stage of this procedure. Suddenly, Lee Taek-jin sneezed loudly and tears appeared in his eyes. Han Sang Hun saw this and decided to intervene, believing that if the main character continued in the same spirit, he would not succeed. Kim Yun-chan intended to take advantage of this moment to prove himself and leave a good impression on the professor. Suddenly, the boy asked his friend to open his mouth wide. At that moment, Han Sang Hun stopped, as if instead of intervening, he wanted to continue observing. Looking into Lee Taek-jin's mouth, the protagonist found confirmation of his guess. The pipe got tangled and therefore could not go down. Han Sang Hun immediately asked why Kim Yun-chan asked the guy to open his mouth. The protagonist explained that he did this to make sure that the tube did not get tangled in his partner's mouth. The professor praised the guy for this decision and explained to the other interns that if the patient was crying and had a runny nose, it was worth examining his throat. The man then asked the rest of his students to also split into pairs and try to carry out this procedure. After this, the professor thought about the fact that the technique demonstrated by the main character was a rather inconspicuous detail, but it was quite difficult to learn about it without experience. The man also believed that this guy had good instincts, and in addition, he was confident enough to volunteer. Despite all this, the most important thing for the professor now was that the main character was not from Yonhee University. That is why the man soon turned to Kim Yun-chan to offer him something like this. The professor thanked the guy for the excellent demonstration and asked if he would mind having coffee with him after class. Some time passed. The sun set behind the horizon, painting the sky a bright orange color. Kim Yun-chan and Han Sang Hun, as agreed, went to drink coffee after class, which was sold at a vending machine nearby. The professor claimed that the coffee at the training center was very tasty and offered the guy to try it. Sitting down on a bench, the man asked if the main character had had a hard time during the distribution. Kim Yun-chan confidently denied it. Han Sang Hun suggested that it was because the guy graduated from Yongji University with the best grades. The man also warned that the main character would have a very difficult time with his schedule. Kim Yun-chan replied that even despite the difficulties, it would all be worth it. This answer really surprised the professor. He then praised the guy for thinking correctly and suddenly stated that he had no doubts about him. Kim Yun-chan did not understand what the man meant. Han Sang Hun understood that the main character was interested in why he called him here in the first place, so he decided to get straight to the point. The next moment, the man suggested that Kim Yun-chan do an internship in the thoracic surgery department. The main character was taken aback by this proposal and for some time did not even know what to answer. In fact, this reaction was just a game. In his mind, the guy was glad that the professor he hated fell for his trick. Due to the very nature of thoracic surgery, operations were performed constantly and the mortality rate was high. The shortage of personnel in this department was so great that there were never more than 10 medical workers in it. With this situation, the appearance of the main character was like rain after a drought for Professor Han Sang Hun. He saw the boy's flair and skills, and given his humble background, he also saw in him obedience and an inability to interfere with his master. When the man invited Kim Yun-chan to join the thoracic surgery department, he immediately realized that in this life too, the professor was going to make a watchdog out of him. The main character was discouraged by this proposal, but mentally he was already glad that the hated professor had fallen for his trick. Kim Yun-chan, like last time, was going to go to the thoracic surgery department because he was not interested in anything else. Han Sang Hun did not receive the guy's answer, so he was afraid that this proposal did not interest him, but the main character simply did not want to agree right away. Kim Yun-chan replied that this proposal was unexpected for him. The professor admitted that he was too impatient because such talented specialists did not come every year. In the end, the man decided not to rush and give the main character time to think. To Kim Yun-chan's surprise, he immediately replied that there was no need to do this because he had already made his decision. Thoracic surgery department because he was going to go there anyway. The guy needed to show the man his doubts and only then agree, so as not to arouse suspicion. Han Sang Hun, hearing this, was very happy and praised his student for the right decision. Kim Yun-chan smiled kindly and hoped that he and the professor would work together. In the end, the professor and his student came to an agreement and shook hands. Everything continued to go as Kim Yun-chan wanted. After some time, the interns were allowed to go home for a short time to rest from this difficult work week. Lee Taek-jin was very happy about the upcoming weekend because he knew that even more hell would begin next week. Unexpectedly, Kim Ji-dui-nam turned to the main character and asked if he was free in the evening, because the guy, as promised, wanted to treat him. Kim Yun-chan replied that unfortunately he already had an appointment. Kim Ji-dui-nam was very upset by what he heard and began asking about this meeting. The meeting was supposed to take place this evening at the Sebastian Hospital building. The laboratory in the cardiac surgery department was already prepared for a long conversation. No one was to interfere with this meeting. The main character had to meet someone very important. This man was needed on site and was staring intently at Kim Yun-chan. The guy silently looked at the professor in response, not even guessing why he had invited him here. The protagonist did not understand why the man asked him to come here right after the familiarization tour and began to assume that Han Sang Hun was involved in this. Professor Goem was the best cardiac surgeon at Yonhee Hospital and was someone who put patients first and had no interest in hospital politics. Perhaps this is why the professor did not pay attention to the main character when he was Han Sang Hun's hunting dog. However, now everything was different. Now Kim Yun-chan had to leave a good first impression of himself, which made the guy a little worried. Finally, Professor Goem turned to the protagonist after looking at him in silence for a long time. The man asked what was wrong with Kim Yun-chan. This question sounded very strange. That is why the guy did not understand what the professor meant and did not know how to answer this question. Then Goem said that he had already heard from Yoon Sang-hyun that the main character had saved someone's life. The guy modestly replied that he was only following the professor's instructions. Despite this, the man was still impressed. Kim Yun-chan could not believe that Professor Goham, who was very stingy with praise, said this just because of the pericardiocentesis procedure. The man then asked if the guy had really carried out this complex procedure blindly without the necessary equipment. The main character showed that his interlocutor did not believe in this, and therefore decided that he needed to answer decisively and without doubt. The guy confirmed that he really did it, but Professor Goham didn't like it at all. He thought it was very risky because an inexperienced guy could pierce the intercostal artery. Kim Yun-chan replied that it didn't matter because his friend would have died either from a ruptured intercostal artery or from hypotensive shock. This did not convince the professor. He believed that the guy had simply put the patient's life on the line. Then the main character confidently declared that it was not a bet but a balanced decision, and he would repeat it in the same situation in the future. The guy continued to say that neglecting the technique was of course bad, but he could not leave the patient to die. Hearing this, Professor Goham asked if this was the reason why the boy had performed the pericardiocentesis procedure. Kim Yun-chan briefly confirmed this. The main character also added that if something went wrong, he was ready to take full responsibility. At that moment, the man suddenly jumped up from his seat and loudly declared that an intern like Kim Yun-chan had no right to talk about responsibility. The main character saw this reaction and immediately realized that using standard methods to leave a good impression was not the best solution, and now everything has only gotten worse. For a while, Professor Goham stood silently by the window, trying to come to his senses. Kim Yun-chan was afraid of making his situation worse, so he also remained silent. Finally, the man asked when the guy would come to their department. The main character replied that his work would start the day after tomorrow. Hearing this, the professor advised the intern to get ready because he would have a lot of work. Kim Yun-chan promised to try. The guy got a reprimand from the professor today, but it was much better than being completely ignored like before. Suddenly, Gokum said that from that moment on, the guy was an intern, and therefore he should behave appropriately, because if something like that happens again, he will no longer put on a white coat. Kim Yun-chan understood perfectly well what these words meant to him, so he assured that he understood everything, smiling along the way. After this, the main character decided that the conversation was over and therefore bowed low and left the office. For some time after the door closed, Professor Goham stood by the window and thought about this conversation. It seemed the man was still unhappy that the guy was so brave with his actions and responded calmly with his head held high. At this time, Kim Yun-chan was walking through the hospital corridors and was also thinking about the conversation that had just happened. The guy remembered the professor's words that if something like this happened again, he would no longer wear a white coat. The main character perceived these words as a second chance, which Professor Goham had never given to anyone before. In fact, the man was glad to meet Kim Yun-chan, because after so many years, in his opinion, a worthy intern had finally appeared. The main character was also happy, and could not believe that the man who never gave anyone a second chance forgave him for what happened. The guy thought that this was a very good start. Soon spring came. It was the time of year when everything began. Hospitals were no exception, since in March all recently graduated interns received jobs. Because of the large number of inexperienced interns, people even said, "Don't go to university hospitals in March." The internet was also very worried. Kim Gi-wi Nam was afraid that he would not be able to handle his duties, and Lee Taek-jin was worried because it was rumored that orthopedic surgery was very difficult. No matter how hard it was, both guys simultaneously agreed on what was the hardest thing. They were not at all envious of the main character, who from the very first week went to work in the thoracic surgery department. The reaction of his friends greatly amused Kim Yun-chan. Both guys wished their friend good luck and believed that he could handle it. The main character did not understand whether this was a parting word or a farewell speech. Kim Gi-wi Nam blamed himself for what Kim Yun-chan was about to go through, but there was nothing he could do about it. The main character, standing at the on-duty office of the Nardio surgery department, mentally asked his friends not to worry, because the place they called hell was his home. Kim Yun-chan recalled that 20 years ago, everything here was exactly the same. The guy was overcome with nostalgia. The main character was ready to go this way again, so he confidently grabbed the door handle and turned it. Entering the office, Kim Yun-chan immediately bowed respectfully and introduced himself loudly, saying that from today on he was an intern in the cardiac surgery department. In response, the main character heard only silence, since there was no one in the office except him. The guy realized what an awkward situation he was in and even laughed at himself. In the end, Kim Yun-chan decided that since he was here, he should look around. The longer the guy was in this office, the more memories he had. Suddenly, the main character noticed a table on which lay a patient's card. The guy decided to take a look at her, because he didn't remember which patients were here at that time. Suddenly, the main character felt a strong sense of alarm from what he saw on this map. Kim Yun-chan looked over the information in the document over and over again, thinking that this simply couldn't be true. What caught the guy's attention most was the name of the patient who owned this card. Her name was Lee Yun-ji. The main character was shocked because he didn't understand why this patient was already here. Lee Yun-ji was the first patient that Kim Yun-chang treated as a resident physician. He was a child diagnosed with idiopathic myocardial hypertrophy, in which the heart was greatly enlarged. This child also had a rare genetic disease called Pompe disease. Unfortunately, it had no specific diagnostic or treatment methods. Last time, Yun-ji underwent surgery and without knowing it, went into shock and died from post-operative complications. Professor Goem, who was the head of the department at the time, took charge and left Yonhee Hospital, carrying this heavy burden alone. Now Kim Yun-chan didn't understand why this child, who was supposed to be admitted to the hospital only after several years, was already here. The guy assumed that something had gone wrong again because of his regression. While the main character was immersed in these thoughts, someone quietly entered the office. The next moment, a loud voice of a stranger asked what the guy was doing here. This really scared Kim Yun-chan. As he walked into the office, the stranger continued to say that he did not know that another junior doctor had appeared in their department. It turned out that the man was Professor Han Sang Hun, who was one of the leading members of the cardiac surgery department but was now still a resident physician. Kim Yun-chan immediately bowed respectfully and introduced himself. Han Sang Hun was glad to meet him and hoped for a good collaboration this month. Then the man asked why the main character was still here and where the person who was seeing him off was. The guy said that when he arrived, there was no one here. Han Sang Hun immediately understood what was going on, and so, approaching one of the beds, he began to loudly wake up his colleague, who was hiding under a mountain of medical gowns. Soon the man woke up. It was Jang Dae-han, who had been working in this department for 3 years. Han Sang Hun then began to scold his colleague for sleeping instead of giving the intern a tour. Jang Dae-han immediately paid attention to the main character and, seeing the patient's card in his hands, praised him for already delving into their work. The man also said that the patient was hospitalized yesterday, and now Kim Yun-chan should request the tests that were listed on the card. Soon after, the protagonist approached the room in which his little patient lay. Inside the ward, the guy saw a woman who was carefully looking after her child. Kim Yun-chan recalled that now everything was the same as in his past life. He really hoped that the disease had not yet manifested itself. The guy decided that he should first check the child for symptoms, so he quickly entered the room and pestered the woman. The protagonist said that he had to conduct several tests, but before that he wanted to quickly examine Yun-ji. The main character, without wasting any time, took out a flashlight and turned to the child in order to attract his attention. The first thing he checked was the reaction to light, which was significantly reduced. Then the main character put his finger in Yun-ji's hand to test her grasping reflex. It turned out that the child was exhausted. Kim Yun-chan also found that his patient's tongue was slightly larger than it should have been at that age. While the boy was being examined, the child's mother watched him closely, not hiding her excitement. Finally, she asked if there was something wrong with her child. Kim Yun-chan denied it and explained that he was just checking Yun-ji's physical development. Despite this answer, the woman was still worried. Soon she decided to ask the doctor the question that was troubling her. The woman said that her heart had been weak since childhood, so she was worried whether this could be connected with what was happening to her child. The guy heard this and immediately asked if the woman had any diagnosis. She said that despite the fact that she quickly lost her breath and it was difficult for her to walk, according to the doctors, everything was within normal limits. The woman still had difficulty walking and was quickly out of breath, but other than snoring from sinusitis, she had no other diagnosis. What she heard made the protagonist think. Pompe disease was a genetic disorder that prevented important enzymes from working properly. In the case of Yun-ji's mother, the disease was late onset, appearing gradually in her 60s. This disease gradually led to the invasion of the back muscles, which in turn caused the woman problems with her gait. Also, the invasion of the diaphragm caused symptoms of apnea, which manifested itself in snoring during sleep. It could be assumed that the invasion of the heart was minimal. Therefore, no significant anomalies were found during the examination. Kim Yun-chan regretfully assumed that Yun-ji's Pompe disease was most likely hereditary. Meanwhile, the child's mother was no longer able to contain her emotions and through tears asked if all this was really because of her sick body. Kim Yun-chan confidently replied that the woman was not to blame for Yoonji getting sick. So instead of blaming herself, she should have been there for the baby. The guy said that in this case, the child will feel the presence of the mother and will fight the disease. These words touched the woman. Wiping away her tears, she thanked the main character who, with his words, gave her hope for the best. After this, Kim Yun-chan asked the woman to go to the examination room to conduct some tests. The child was soon taken to the diagnostic imaging department where they performed X-rays, MRI, and CT scans. While the tests were being carried out, the main character was restless and thought non-stop about the condition of his patient. Kim Yun-chan was not at all happy that Yoonji had developed Pompe disease again because he didn't know what to do about it. The guy was afraid that if he left everything as it was, then both Yoonji and Professor Goem would have to leave them a few years earlier. The main character couldn't let this happen, but since he was just an intern, his hands were tied, so he needed to ask someone for help. At that moment, the guy heard a familiar voice loudly talking to someone about some urgent matter. It turned out that it was Kim Ji-dui Nam, who really needed to have a CT scan today, but the CT scan schedule was already full. Kim Yun-chan knew very well that this was just an excuse because if the schedule was really full, the lab assistants would not have time to walk around the corridors without doing anything. However, the senior doctor stood his ground and said that Kim Ji-wui we were told to come only tomorrow morning. At this point, the main character intervened in the conversation and politely asked the man to move the schedule somehow since the patient was very urgent. Despite this, the senior doctor continued to insist on his own and claimed that there were simply no non-urgent patients, so it would definitely not be possible to conduct an examination today. Then Kim Yun-chan quickly called the professor and asked what he should do, since the director's granddaughter would not be able to undergo a CT scan today. Hearing this, the senior doctor noticeably tensed up and already regretted that he had refused the interns. In order to quickly correct his situation, the man allegedly remembered that the current examination had just been canceled, so the patient could undergo a tomography right now. Then the worried senior doctor quickly ran into the office and promised that he had done everything possible to ensure that the director's granddaughter could undergo the examination without delays. Kim Ji-wui Nam was very surprised and did not understand what kind of patient they were talking about, since he asked to conduct an examination for a completely different person. In order to explain everything without unnecessary words, the main character silently handed his phone to his friend. It turned out that on the other end was a dissatisfied Lee Taek-jin, who did not understand what Kim Yun-chan wanted from him. The guy didn't like the fact that his friend was playing pranks while he was working hard, so he quickly ended the call. When Kim Ji-wui Nam realized what had happened, he asked if it was really possible to do this. The main character replied that the most important thing was that no one found out about it. Kim Ji-wui Nam was ready to use this method a few more times to advance his cues. At that moment, the protagonist was struck by lightning as if he realized something. Then Kim Yun-chan happily grabbed his bewildered friend by the shoulders, asking him why he hadn't thought of this before. After that, the guy thanked Kim Ji-wui Nama, quickly ran off to do his business. It turned out that the main character realized that since Yoonji was hospitalized several years earlier, they could advance the development of diagnostics and treatment several years ahead. The guy recalled that after Yoonji's death, the weight of his guilt was unbearable. So at that time, he helped Professor Han Min-woo from the endocrinology department study the treatment of Pompe diseases. Now Kim Yun-chan was sure that if this was the disease that was being discussed, then Professor Han Min-woo would be able to diagnose it just by looking at Yoonji and her mother. Without wasting any time, the main character quickly began typing an email to that same professor. Now the guy had to decide on the meeting about Yoonji's operation, which would take place in a week. He needed to find out if Pompe disease would be mentioned there. Meanwhile, Professor Han Min-woo, who was just in his office, received that very email. It seemed that the man immediately began to carefully read this message and think about its content. A week later, the doctors gathered in a conference room to discuss the condition of one of the patients. The surgeons listened attentively to the report of one of their colleagues in order to soon make a compromise decision. The baby in question was a girl named Lee Yoon-ji, who was only 85 days old. The child was hospitalized with acute respiratory distress syndrome. Kim Yun-chan was looking forward to this conference. He was very interested in how it would all end. Sending an email to Professor Han Min-woo sounded like a good idea, but it wasn't that simple. Perhaps because of the anonymity of this letter, the professor did not read it for almost a week. Because of this, the main character was very worried, because due to the patient's age, everyone needed to be well prepared. Soon, Professor Goham announced that he would be the chief surgeon and that Dr. Han Sang Hun would assist him. It seemed that no one was against this. No one present noticed how worried Kim Yun-chan was. He was the only one who knew that Yoon-ji and Professor Goham were in danger. Soon the decision was made and the meeting ended, so the doctors began to go about their business. However, the protagonist continued to think about this whole situation. He thought that since it had come to this point, he would have to notify Professor Goham directly. The guy knew this man's character well, so he was sure that if he was consistent, he would be able to make him think. Kim Yun-chan decided not to waste time and tried to approach the professor right in the corridor. At that moment, another intern ran out from around the corner looking very worried about something. He also turned to Professor Goham. Kim Yun-chan had never met this guy before because he worked in another department. It was unclear what he wanted from the professor. After a short conversation, Inter took the man somewhere, which was not at all part of the main character's plans. The operation was scheduled for an hour later, so if Kim Yun-chan could change anything, it would only be now. Soon, Professor Goham arrived at the room where Yoon-ji was. Professor Han Min-woo was already waiting for the man. The man examined the child and soon asked the woman for permission to check Yoon-ji's mouth. The doctor also said that he needed to check the strength of the child's grip. The woman had already seen something similar, so she was very surprised. Without thinking twice, she asked whether it was really necessary to check the children's physical development so often. The men did not immediately understand what the child's mother meant. Then she said that a few days ago, another doctor had done the same examination on Yoon-ji. Professor Goham clarified whether this doctor was Professor Gu-woo, who was responsible for this patient. The woman denied this because the doctor was much younger. Upon hearing this, the man immediately assumed that they were talking about the intern, Kim Yun-chan. The woman immediately confirmed this. She also added that the guy was so experienced that she didn't even notice how she told him about her sinusitis. Professor Han Min-woo. How often did the woman experience loud snoring or discomfort when walking? The woman was very surprised to hear this question because she did not understand how the man could know about this. He said that her heart had been weak since childhood, so she quickly became exhausted. Professor Goham immediately understood what all this could mean, but he did not voice his thoughts yet. At the same time, Han Min-woo wanted to talk to the protagonist. The man asked his colleague to tell Kim Yun-chan to come to his lab. Soon, the guy was already sitting opposite Professor Han Min-woo and trying to act as if he didn't understand what was going on. Finally, the professor started the conversation, and the first thing he asked was whether the main character really had performed the pericardiocentesis procedure blindly. The man claimed that even for professionals, it was not an easy procedure, so he thought the guy was amazing. Kim Yun-chan felt awkward because of these words. The man then suggested that the main character was interested in the reason for which he had called him to this conversation. Kim Yun-chan, of course, knew very well what was going on, but he didn't show it and continued to stick to his image. Unexpectedly, Professor Han Min-woo handed the boy a printed piece of paper and asked if he was the one who sent him this anonymous letter. For some time, the guy looked attentively at the sheet of paper with the text, as if he was seeing it for the first time. At the same time, Kim Yun-chan immediately assumed that the professor intended to verify the information that was presented in this letter. The guy asked directly if Yoon-ji really had Pompe disease. Hearing this, the man realized that the main character had sent him this letter, but he did not understand why it was anonymous. Kim Yun-chan replied that he did it because he doubted that the man would believe the intern. For this, the guy asked for forgiveness. Han Min-woo said that at first he thought it was just spam, but the letter kept coming, so he read it anyway. After that, the professor and Goham examined the child. Now, the man was most interested in how the guy found out that Yoon-ji had pump disease. The main character replied that it was just a coincidence. According to the main character, he had just recently read the professor's dissertation. The man was shocked by what he heard, as if such a thing simply could not happen. The thing was that this professor's dissertation was so narrowly focused that it was difficult to understand even for specialists. But Kim Yun-chan not only read it, but was also able to diagnose the disease. Realizing this, the man admitted that Professor Goham was absolutely right about this guy, and now he wanted the main character to work in his department. The professor then went on to say regretfully that Yoon-ji was the fastest growing newborn with the worst prognosis of all Pompe disease patients. According to the man, it was very dangerous to perform heart surgery, since the slightest reaction of the immune system could be fatal. Then, Kim Yun-chan asked if there was another treatment, but unfortunately there wasn't one yet. Pompe disease is a condition in which glycogen does not expand in the lysosomes, but accumulates in them, which leads to the failure of many body systems. The main problem was the lack of alpha-glucosidase, which was responsible for the expansion of glycogen. Researchers were still studying ways to restore the alpha-glucosidase deficiency in humans, but even after thousands of simulations, it still could not be reactivated. The professor continued to say that if this problem could be solved, everything else would be much simpler. The protagonist knew that the theory had already been put forward, but 8 years were still needed to develop the treatment. The guy thought that the answer to this question was right in front of them, so he decided to ask the professor another question. Kim Yun-chan asked if they couldn't limit the production of glycogen in Yoonji's body. Professor Han Min-woo was very surprised by this proposal and seemed to think it was quite probable. The man did not understand how he himself had not thought of this before, because breaking down glycogen, or preventing it from being produced, was essentially the same way of treating the disease. The professor again praised the main character, saying that he had surprised him several times that day. Kim Yun-chan denied this and said that he asked the question only because he did not know the answer. However, Han Min-woo was still surprised by how quickly the guy changed his view of the situation. Suddenly, the man asked if the guy knew what kind of tea he was drinking. The professor said it was a tea made from coconut palm leaves, which were rich in lauric acid, making it a good digestive aid. According to rumors, the inhabitants of New Guinea who drank this tea never suffered from gastrointestinal diseases. Of course, they initially did not know about the beneficial properties of coconut palm leaves and considered them only a good snack. According to Professor Han Min-woo, the same thing happened with medicines. Beneficial plants could surround people who simply did not notice their existence. Kim Yun-chan completely agreed with the man and believed that he already knew the solution to the problem. The main character had already suggested to the professor a way to prevent the accumulation of glycogen, and now the only question was which substance to use. Now the guy doubted whether he could give the man a few more hidden clues in order to speed up the process. Still, he said that it would be good if someone guided Professor Han Min-woo so that he would not stray from the right path, someone like chaperone. The man, having heard about chaperone, was very surprised because he did not know what it meant. The protagonist explained that these words meant an assistant who helped a young, inexperienced girl from an aristocratic family become a worthy member of society. The boy then wrote the word on a piece of paper to show the professor its correct spelling. Kim Yun-chan continued to say that he remembered this when he smelled tea because he loved to read novels about formal receptions, tea parties, and balls. Han Min-woo, what's wrong with you is that the guy even read such literature and thought that the word chaperone sounded interesting. The word reminded the man of the name of a protein that had similar functionality. It helped other proteins achieve a three-dimensional structure. At this moment, Professor Han Min-woo suddenly fell silent and thought about something. The man was struck by lightning when he realized that it was the protein chaperone that could help treat Pompe disease. A chaperone is a protein that breaks down clumps of large protein chains and helps maintain homeostasis. If this property is used correctly, it is possible to prevent the accumulation of glucagon in the body. Professor Han Min-woo was shocked when he realized this because this was how Pompe disease could be cured. Suddenly, Kim Yun-chan jumped up from his seat. Someone was calling him. The man thought that their conversation could end there. Without wasting time, the main character quickly left the office, giving the professor the opportunity to continue his thoughts. The guy was pleased with this conversation because he noticed that the man paid attention to his words, and now all that was left was to start developing a medicine. At this time, Professor Han Min-woo actually began to sort through some records in order to find confirmation of his theory. Soon it was mid-March, but work in the hospital continued as before. For the interns, the first week of work was pure hell. Lee Taek-jin and Kim Gi-dae-nam didn't even want to cross the threshold of the hospital anymore. At the same time, for other employees, it was a normal working day. They had long been accustomed to such workloads, so they allowed themselves to laugh at the interns. Everyone had to be at the appointed place at the appointed time, because the hospital was a place where a person did only what he had to. Perhaps it was because of this boring routine that rumors in the hospital spread very quickly. This is exactly what happened this time. Everyone was talking about an intern who came to the hospital and his first rotation was thoracic surgery. They said that this guy was very talented. Some even thought that Kim Yun-chan seemed to see the future, because he always did everything before he was asked. Eventually, these rumors reached Professor Goem. His colleagues pestered him with questions about this guy, believing that he was the real star of the training center. At the same time, the professor himself did not think so, and insisted that the main character was just an intern who was trying to appear important and busy. Professor Han Min-woo heard all this and said that his colleague was going too far and warned that if Kim Yun-chan heard something like this, he would be upset. The man continued to say that the guy was so smart that he was able to understand his dissertation, and during the conversation with him, it felt like he was a different professor. That's why Han Min-woo advised his colleague to keep an eye on the main character and help him. Professor Goem was very upset to hear all this. Suddenly, the man began to demand that his interlocutor stop talking nonsense and creating problems out of thin air. At the same time, the professor admitted that his colleagues had a keen eye, and at this rate, he could simply lose another talented person to another department. In the end, the man decided that he needed to take extreme measures, and for this, he soon called the main character to his office. Kim Yun-chan was very surprised when the professor stated that he would be responsible for Yoonji's treatment and did not raise the reasoning behind this decision. Professor Goem was in no hurry to explain anything and only handed the guy the patient's card. Kim Yun-chan did not refuse this job and happily accepted it. Suddenly, the man handed his subordinate a bank card and asked him to take it too. The professor asked the boy to buy himself some normal food and not eat only instant noodles. Kim Yun-chan felt awkward, so he refused. The man did not accept this refusal and said that the guy looked pathetic because he had not washed for several days and looked very tired. The main character could not argue with this in any way, so he eventually accepted this gift. Suddenly, Professor Goem was stunned as if struck by lightning. It seemed he had just realized something. At that very moment, the man snatched his bank card without giving it to the main character. Kim Yun-chan did not understand what was happening and even began to assume that the professor was simply making fun of him. For some time, the man himself was discouraged and therefore could not immediately explain his actions. Finally, he stated that the guy needed to make a clear choice whether to join the cardiac surgery department or not. Professor Goem knew that the main character wanted to work here, but he didn't understand why he read Kim Yun-chan's dissertation on endocrinology. He was glad that he was only looking for it for preliminary research. The professor thought it was nonsense. He insisted that the protagonist was thinking too much instead of just silently following him for the next 3 years. Kim Yun-chan was shocked by what he heard because he immediately understood what these words meant. This literally meant an offer of employment, which meant that the main character and his skills were liked by the stern Professor Gahamu. The guy immediately remembered that in his past life this professor didn't even want to look at him, but now everything was different. This, of course, made the young specialist happy. In the end, Kim Yun-chan confidently stated that he understood everything and promised to do everything in his power. Soon after, the main character was already walking along the hospital corridors, studying his patient's chart along the way. Kim Yun-chan couldn't believe that he was responsible for Yoonji again. It brought back many memories from his past life. Suddenly, the guy, continuing to study the patient's card, suddenly stopped as if he saw something unusual there. The main character was surprised to realize that something would happen in just 2 weeks. He didn't even notice that someone was approaching him from behind. The next moment, someone slapped the guy hard on the back and asked what the intern was doing here. Han Sang Hun was surprised that every time he saw the guy, he had a medical card in his hands. When he saw the senior doctor, Kim Yun-chan had an idea, so he immediately started talking to me. Finally, the guy turned to his senior colleague and asked if he could help him with something. Han Sang Hun was surprised, but he began to listen attentively to the protagonist. If something lasted a short time, then time passed quickly. But if it lasted a long time, then time dragged on like an eternity. Someone spent all their time concentrating on their research in order to achieve the best result. Someone gave themselves completely, forgetting about the patient who needed help. At the same time, some concentrated on their plight, which made things even worse for them. Anyway, this special day finally arrived, so Kim Yun-chan went to a small store. The guy was glad that all the preparations were almost finished, so it seemed he wanted to treat himself to something tasty. The main character's attention was immediately drawn to a small strawberry cake, which he took from the shelf without further ado. Approaching the checkout, the guy was about to pay for his purchase, but suddenly someone held out their bank card. Turning to the side, Kim Yun-chan saw a young girl in a white coat whom he knew. It was a pediatric resident named Yoon Ina. The guy didn't understand why she paid for him. Meanwhile, the girl asked if he was that same Kim Yun-chan. It turned out that Kim Gwi Nam was telling the girl about the main character and his skills, which were already at the level of a professor. The main character was very embarrassed because of this. Gwi Nam also said that he owed a lot to the main character, so Yoon Ina asked him to accept this cake as gratitude. Then she asked if it was Kim Yun-chan's birthday, since this cake was usually taken for such occasions. It seemed that the guy would have a hard time answering this question. Meanwhile, exhausted Yoonji was sleeping in her room as usual, while her mother was watching her closely, without looking away. The woman was completely inconsolable because she had not received any good news for a long time. Suddenly, she heard several familiar voices outside the door. People were discussing something and seemed to be about to enter. The next moment, joyful doctors entered the room and began to congratulate Yoon-ji on her 100th day. The fact is that in the past, infant mortality in Korea was so high that the 100th day was considered an important date. The woman immediately began asking what was happening here. The main character explained that he would soon move to another department, but before that he would like to do something one more time for his patient. That's why Kim Yoon-chan decided to throw a celebration on Yoon-ji's 100th day in order to bring joyful emotions to these sad days. The woman was touched by this act and therefore began to thank the guy through tears. Due to stress, she completely forgot about this date. Kim Yoon-chan and his colleagues were only too happy to arrange this celebration in order to support the woman and her child. The main character reassured his patient's mother and really hoped that in this life he would be able to help Yoon-ji. A man was immediately watching everything that was happening from behind the door, and it seemed he did not share all these joyful emotions. Next, Han Sang Hun handed the woman a small box tied with a red ribbon and asked her to open the gift. The woman tried to refuse the gift, believing that the doctors had already done a lot. But Kim Yoon-chan insisted that they had spent a long time choosing this gift. Finally, the woman took the box in her hands. At that moment, the same mysterious man who had been watching everything from behind the door began to enter the room. Professor Goem, accompanied by Professor Han Min-woo, looked around and asked with confusion what was happening here. Han Sun-jin explained that today was Yoon-ji's 100th day, and so they decided to celebrate a little. Professor Goem heard this and felt that he couldn't stay away. Without thinking twice, the man handed over his bank card and asked his colleagues to buy good clothes for the child, since he had to be dressed appropriately that day. Professor Han Min-woo immediately said that his colleague could simply rent clothes from a first birthday service and not spend much. Next, Kim Yoon-chan turned to his patient's mother and said that she had to blow out the holiday candle. Meanwhile, Professor Goem silently looked at his colleague. Professor Han Min-woo also silently nodded his head as if he understood what he wanted from him. After this, the main character saw how the men left the room without saying a word, as if they were going to discuss something in private. Soon, the two professors entered Han Min-woo's office where no one would disturb them. Professor Goem paced nervously from side to side as if she had heard some disappointing news. The man didn't understand why they couldn't do it now. Han Min-woo explained once again that it would take 3 years to get approval, even if they tried to speed up the process. Professor Goem was furious when he heard this, because Yoon-ji could die tomorrow. He didn't understand why it was necessary to develop a cure in that case. The man continued to get angry and say that these damn laws prevented them from treating people. They were talking about the regulations on the safety of pharmaceutical and medical products. According to this regulation, the use of untested new drugs for therapeutic purposes was strictly prohibited. Since the effectiveness and side effects were not yet known, several studies had to be conducted. Unexpectedly, Professor Goem asked if they could skip the certification and just use the medicine. He was ready to bear all the responsibility alone. Professor Han Min-woo warned his colleagues that this threatened to cause the loss of his license. At that moment, someone knocked on the office door. The men immediately stopped their conversation. Soon, Kim Yoon-chan's voice was heard from behind the door, announcing his arrival. The guy was allowed to enter. Kim Yoon-chan apologized for the intrusion and walked into the office. Professor Han Min-woo immediately began asking what happened. At the same time, Professor Goem was unhappy because he did not understand why the main character came here again. Kim Yoon-chang couldn't help but notice that the atmosphere in the office was very tense. He immediately understood what was going on. "Don't waste time," the guy asked if the medicine had already been developed. Professor Han Min-woo was very surprised and asked how the main character knew about it. However, the man confirmed that he had already prepared the medicine for use, but it would take at least 3 years for it to be approved. With a heavy sigh, the man continued to say that he had already discussed this with Professor Goem, and they had come to the conclusion that they had no choice but to wait. Kim Yoon-chan, hearing this, realized that the men had not yet talked about the method that he wanted to suggest now. The main character sat down on the sofa and unexpectedly for the professors, calmly suggested using this drug not as a medicine. Professor Goham and Han Min-woo were very surprised to hear this and seemed to immediately understand what the protagonist was getting at. We were talking about clinical trials. It was a difficult path which included not only a couple of obstacles but also huge financial costs. Professor Han Min-woo believed that even if permission for clinical trials could be obtained, there would still be problems with the legality of using the drug. Kim Yun-chan understood this very well, so he already had some thoughts about it. Suddenly, the guy started taking out some documents from his patient's card and suggesting to do just that. The men were very surprised by this proposal because they had not even thought about this way of solving the problem. Soon the doctors handed the mother of their little patient a brochure from the DNA Diagnostic Laboratory at Johns Hopkins Hospital, which was located in the United States. The woman was very surprised when they started telling her about clinical trials at the Johns Hopkins Institute of Genetic Research. Professor Han Min-woo continued to say that through a clinical trial, they will be able to use the medicine he developed. Suddenly, the alarmed woman grabbed the doctor's hand tightly and began asking if her child would get better if this test was carried out. The woman wanted to know if Yoon-ji would be able to recover and live a normal life after treatment. It was a difficult question, so Professor Goem took a moment to find the right words. However, he said that unfortunately they could not guarantee a full recovery. However, the man was absolutely certain that it was best to begin treatment as soon as possible. The professor, also holding back his emotions, said that unfortunately clinical trials in Korea were impossible, so the only option was to use the proposed method. Therefore, if the request for a joint study is accepted, Yoon-ji will need to be sent to Johns Hopkins as soon as possible. The woman continued to dare the doctor's hand all this time, thanks to which he immediately noticed her strong excitement. Professor Han Min-woo began to assure that the woman had no reason to worry. Hopkins Hospital was recognized throughout the world, and in addition, it took on all the costs. The competition was high, and the process itself was demanding, but the doctors did their best to prepare all the necessary documents. Professor Han Min-woo himself also personally negotiated with the other side in order to achieve a quick result. The man was ready to give everything he had to research Pompe disease. Now the professor assured that although they would have to send Yoon-ji to another hospital, in a couple of years the child would be able to receive treatment in Korea. Sometime later, the phone rang in Professor Han Min-woo's office. The man immediately assumed that the results of his request had arrived and therefore immediately began to answer the call. All this time, the mother of the little patient could not find a place for herself and rushed around the ward from side to side, waiting for what lay ahead. Kim Yun-chan, seeing this, understood the woman's feelings, but could not immediately find the right words to support her. Finally, the guy turned to her and asked if she was nervous. The woman immediately turned her attention to the main character. She then confirmed that she was very nervous because this was her child's only hope. At that moment, one of the hospital staff members quietly entered the room to report the latest news. The professor greeted the woman, who, upon seeing him, immediately came closer, expecting a long conversation. Without wasting any time, she asked how everything went and what the result was. Kim Yun-chan was worried because he saw that the professor looked gloomy. Now the guy was very afraid of hearing bad news. Professor Goem began to speak with an excited voice about the results of the clinical trial request. His expression was completely unreadable. At this moment, Yoon-ji's mother and Kim Yun-chan held their breath, not knowing whether they should be happy. The next moment, the man congratulated the woman on the fact that her request had been accepted and asked if she had prepared her passport. Hearing this, the woman, unable to stand on her feet, fell to the floor and began loudly thanking the doctors for everything they had done. Yoon-ji's mother cried with joy and didn't even know how else to express her gratitude. Kim Yun-chan asked the woman not to worry about it. This was just the beginning, but now little Yoon-ji had a chance to recover. This child was the main character's first patient in this new life and therefore special. Kim Yun-chan had been worried about the child no less than his mother all this time, and was therefore also happy about the good news. The guy sincerely wished Yoon-ji health and a happy life. That's how his last day in the thoracic surgery department ended. Very soon, the main character began his first working day in the pediatric department, which of course had its own peculiarities. Kim Yun-chan's first patient at the new location was a little boy who cried loudly all the time and loudly declared that he did not like the injections. At that moment, the guy realized that he was in a very difficult situation from which he had to somehow get out. A few days before the main character moved to a new department, a curious conversation took place in the pediatrics duty room. It all started when several doctors were completely exhausted by a serious case at their work and did not know what to do. One of the doctors complained that he barely caught up with a boy named Woon when he didn't want to give an injection. The second doctor also had a similar relationship with this child. Suddenly, the man in glasses asked if intern Kim Yun-chan would come to them in a week. He wanted to leave this child in the care of the main character. The pediatricians had already heard that Kim Yun-chan was a very good internet user and therefore hoped that he would cope with the difficult patient. After some time, Dr. Yoon-ina briefed the guy on the situation and handed him the patient's card. Finally, she asked if the main character could handle the duties assigned to him. Kim Yun-chan briefly replied that he would try to do his best. Then the main character entered the room of his little patient, and the first thing he did was try to greet him. At that very moment, the boy very loudly declared that he did not want to be given injections. Kim Yun-chan was surprised by this reaction and realized that Woon was very afraid of doctors. However, this did not bother the guy at all, because based on his past experience, he knew well what he had to do in such situations. The first thing the main character did was quickly examine the ward in order to find something that would help him cope with the child. Finally, he saw a toy that was standing on one of the shelves. He needed it to distract Woon. Dr. Yoon-ina didn't know what her intern was planning, so she took that moment of hesitation as doubt and was already beginning to think that she shouldn't have put so much pressure on the guy who had only been working there for a month. The woman decided to help the main character and therefore handed him a lollipop so that he would distract the child with the sweetness. Meanwhile, the boy Woon continued to stare at the main character with distrust, as if he expected some kind of trick from him. Suddenly, the child, as always, loudly declared that he hated doctors and, throwing a toy, demanded that the guy not come near him. Dr. Yoon-ina was shocked by the child's violent reaction, which caused her to fall into a stupor for a while. The boy's mother also did not expect anything like this, and immediately began to calm the child, who continued to insist on his own. The woman asked the main character for a transformation for her son's behavior, and they say that she was very ashamed of him. Kim Yun-chan did not react to these words at all. The mother warned her child that if he continued to throw toys, he would not get them anymore, but now the boy clearly did not care. Suddenly, Kim Yun-chan began to silently approach the little patient. The child was unclear what he should expect from this doctor. The next moment, the main character loudly declared that he was the king of germs from a famous Korean cartoon, and right now he was going to catch the child. The boy asked to let him go, but the main character only laughed and said that the child's body contained a lot of microbes that he needed. Woon thought that he shouldn't worry because the toy called Mr. Bacteria Killer would protect him. Then Kim Yun-chan said that this wouldn't happen because he spent all his strength on the last attack. The main character also warned that if the child continued in the same spirit, the character named Dal-ran would no longer like him. Woon was surprised that the main character knew this character, but the guy himself did not see anything surprising in this, because according to him, he was the king of microbes. Next, Kim Yun-chan told the child that Dal-ran loved brave people who were not afraid of injections. The child understood this, but was afraid of the pain from the injections. Then the main character said that he had brought a painless injection especially for this occasion, which was developed by Dr. Thoracic. This syringe didn't have a needle, so there shouldn't have been any pain. Woon was very surprised and thought that it sounded logical. After that, the intern began to quickly poke the child with a safe syringe, which caused him to stop tickling. The room was instantly filled with children's laughter. At this moment, the protagonist quietly turned to Dr. Yoon-ina and asked her to prepare real syringes. The woman immediately understood what the intern was up to and was therefore very surprised by his resourcefulness. Soon the doctor quietly handed the boy a real syringe with medicine while he continued to distract the child. Without wasting any time, Kim Yun-chan, with one deft movement, stuck the needle into his patient's arm and injected the medicine. At that very moment, the little boy felt a sharp pain that made him stop laughing. Woon began to accuse the intern of lying because the injection was still just as painful. Kim Yun-chan claimed that he did not understand what the child was talking about and demonstrated that there was nothing in his hands. The boy was surprised and did not understand what had happened, because he clearly felt that something had pricked him. The main character assumed that his patient was simply nervous. After that, the guy looked at Dr. Yoon-ina with a smile and silently nodded his head, letting her know that the job was done. The woman was surprised by everything she saw and was now absolutely sure that all those rumors about the new intern and his abilities were true. Suddenly, someone entered the room and addressed Woon. The boy immediately recognized the voice and therefore looked away. At the door stood a man with a smile on his face and a small package in his hands. It was the child's father who decided to visit him. The boy immediately rushed to his father, telling him that he had been given an injection, but Dr. King of Microbes had done everything so that it was almost painless. The man, hearing this, thanked the main character and asked for forgiveness for the inconvenience, because he knew what difficulties his son Kim Yun-chan could bring, and he claimed that everything was fine. The man once again thanked the doctors for their hard work after which Dr. Yun Ina and her patient began to leave. As she was leaving, the woman asked the main character when he managed to treat children like that. The guy started telling her that he had a nephew. Along the way, Kim Yun-chan recalled how difficult it was for him to get along with children in his past life. Suddenly, the main character heard a man asking his wife to rub some ointment on his back for pain. The woman immediately asked what happened to him. The man said that yesterday he fell asleep in an awkward position and then woke up with pain in his back. It was a sharp pain like from a needle. These words touched the main character. Without explaining anything, Kim Yun-chan asked Dr. Yun-ina to wait for him while he checked something. The woman did not understand what had happened. The guy approached the man because he was very interested in his words about back pain. That is why he asked for permission to conduct an examination. The man was taken aback by this suddenness, but in the end he quickly agreed. Kim Yun-chan began to palpate the man's back, asking him if he felt anything. The boy's father replied that he felt pain as if he had been stabbed with a knife. The main character also felt the man's chest. The pain here was like being pricked with a needle. After this, Kim Yun-chan suddenly noticed another suspicious symptom. The man's face was red, indicating that he now had high blood pressure. In addition, every time the child's father exhaled, the young specialist heard a wheeze, which gave him some ideas. Kim Yun-chan couldn't just leave it like that, so he immediately turned to the man to give him a recommendation. The guy thought that the man should go to the cardiac surgery department and sign up for a tomography of the back. All this was very unexpected for the child's father. The man did not understand why he had to go to cardiac surgery, because it was just muscle pain. At that moment, Yunina asked the protagonist to step aside with her. The woman asked the guy what had gotten into him. Kim Yun-chan explained that the field in the man's back seemed more serious to him than just a muscle strain. That's why the guy thought he needed to get a CT scan of his back. Yunina immediately realized that according to the main character, this man had an aortic dissection or an abdominal aortic aneurysm. The man listened attentively to this conversation and did not hear Kim Yun-chan's argument that if it were just muscle pain, it would be dull and not sharp. Suddenly, Yunina and her subordinate heard the voice of a man asking his wife to quickly apply ointment to his back because he had to leave for work. Kim Yun-chan, hearing this, advised the man to undergo a tomography before leaving, but he insisted that he needed to go already. Then the agitated protagonist asked you if the man really didn't want to do something about the pain and promised to move him up the line. Suddenly, the man threw the guy's hand away and asked with displeasure why he was making such a fuss if he wasn't even a doctor yet. The child's father insisted that the protagonist should have behaved like an intern and not wasted the hospital's resources. The woman did not understand what was wrong with her husband and why he was so irritable. In response to this, the man rudely replied that something was wrong with his wife. He didn't like the fact that the woman left the child in the care of an inexperienced intern whose only ability was to give an injection. After this, the man began to leave, demanding that Kim Yun-chan not approach his son's room again. The main character was very puzzled by what was happening, but he understood that he could not let this man go now. The thing was that the aorta could rupture at any moment, which could cause serious harm to Vun's father. The aorta is a major blood vessel that supplies blood from the heart to the rest of the body, and aortic dissection is a condition in which the wall of the aorta tears from the inside, leaking blood underneath and eventually literally tearing the heart apart. The scariest thing about it is that people who suffer from it increase their chance of dying by 1% for every hour of their life. Kim Yun-chan was afraid that if he let the man go now, there might not be a next time, so he needed to try to stop him one more time. Just at that moment, the main character and Dr. Yun-yina received a message on their pagers. The woman immediately grabbed the guy by the hand and led him after her, because this message indicated an urgent call. The main character was not at all happy about this, and continued to look with despair at the man who did not even suspect his condition. The guy mentally asked to postpone the call for at least 1 second, but it was impossible. Sometime later, Kim Yun-chan and Dr. Yunina were in the room of their patient who needed help. Everything necessary had already been done, so the child's condition was no longer in danger. The woman thanked the main character for his hard work, because it was thanks to him that they managed to do it quickly. The guy accepted this praise with pleasure. Next, Yunina said that they still had a little time left, so they could go to the store. Kim Yun-chan immediately turned his gaze to his watch. Since the conversation with Vun's father, so the boy was worried whether everything was okay with the man. Kim Yun-chan was completely immersed in his thoughts about this, and therefore did not answer Dr. Yunina, so she had to address the guy louder. The young specialist had already come to his senses and asked to repeat the question. The woman asked if the guy wanted to go to her store. Kim Yun-chan suggested that this would be another development, but now he couldn't get one thought out of his head. Dr. Yoon-ina immediately assumed that her subordinate was still thinking about Woon's father. The protagonist did not hide this. Then the woman asked the guy not to worry and added that many people ignored her when she was an intern. Suddenly, someone turned to our heroes and called them into conversation. It turned out that it was Vanu's mother, who wanted to talk to her son's doctors. Dr. Yoon-ina and Kim Yun-chan immediately asked the woman what happened and why she was waiting for them here. Vanu's mother began to ask the main character for forgiveness for her husband's words spoken that morning and assured him that he was not always like this. She then asked if her husband was really sick. Kim Yun-chan replied that he thought the man had several warning signs and that he should get checked. The main character strongly asked that his patient's mother try to convince her husband to get examined. The woman promised that she would do so. Kim Yun-chan was grateful to her for her understanding and asked her to be sure to let him know when the results came in because he still couldn't stop worrying. At this point, the main character assumed that perhaps he really was worrying in vain. The guy really hoped that this was the case. Some time passed. Dr. Yoon-ina and Kim Yun-chan walked around the hospital grounds while they had the opportunity. An unexpected woman approached the guy and asked him to answer her question honestly. The main character was discouraged because he did not understand what was being discussed. The next moment, Yoon-ina asked if this was really the guy's second life. This question, of course, shocked Kim Yun-chan. The woman continued to say with a smile that the guy took good care of the patients. Despite him, it was as if she was watching the professor at work. The main character, of course, could not tell the woman the whole truth, so he only said that she exaggerated his abilities. Suddenly, the main character heard the howl of sirens in the distance, after which he saw an ambulance that was quickly approaching the hospital. The guy immediately began to assume the worst. Without wasting any time, Kim Yun-chan thanked Dr. Yoon-ina for the coffee and quickly began to leave. Soon the guy saw how the ambulance workers pulled out a gurney from the car, on which some man was lying. Kim Yun-chan really hoped that this man was not Woon's father, but his expectations were not destined to come true. The man was quickly taken to the hospital in order to provide him with the necessary assistance as soon as possible. One of the doctors immediately began to conduct an examination. He shone a flashlight into the man's eyes and checked his reaction to light. Next, a resident orthopedist named Ju Sang-ji approached the ambulance workers and asked what had happened to the man. It turned out that he fell at a construction site, but apart from a broken left leg, he only had bruises. That is why he was taken to orthopedists and not to another department. Kim Yun-chan also asked if the boy had said anything about a cutting pain in his stomach. The paramedic confirmed that this was the case. The man said that the patient had no other injuries except for the fracture, but he complained about his stomach. In addition, upon examination, the stomach was hot and pulsating. The main character realized that the aorta was about to rupture. Then the guy asked what happened to the patient's indicators. The paramedic immediately handed the intern a document with all the information. Judging by the document, the man had signs of paroxysmal tachycardia. Kim Yun-chan realized that he was right, and it really was aortic dissection. Unexpectedly, Ju Sang-gi group grabbed the documents from the protagonist's hands and declared that the patient definitely needed to see an orthopedist and not other specialists. From the condition of Father Woon, it was clear that everything was very bad. Kim Yun-chan believed that the man needed to be operated on as soon as possible, because if he first went to the orthopedists, he would definitely lose precious time. At the same time, the main character understood that now he was just an intern, and if he said that the patient had aortic dissection, no one would believe him. The guy wondered what he should do now until one thought came to his mind that gave him hope. Without wasting any time, Kim Yun-chan took out his phone and started dialing the desired number. Now he needed more authority. He hoped that the person he called would at least not treat him like an intern and would not ignore him. At that moment, the phone rang in the car, which was driving quickly through the city streets. The man who was driving answered the call and asked why Kim Yun-chan had called him. The guy apologized for distracting the professor during his off hours, but he needed to discuss something important with him. The main character said that they had just brought in a patient with a fracture, but in addition to everything else, in his opinion, the man had an aortic dissection. Professor Goem was surprised by what he heard. Keeping his cool, the man asked if he should really believe the intern's guesses. Kim Yun-chan begged the professor to believe him. The guy said that the patient was suspected of having high blood pressure and had severe pain in the back, as if from an injection. Professor Gokum thought that it looked like angina. Kim Yun-chan replied that this was not so because the patient complained of pain in the shoulder blade area, and with angina, the pressing pain should be in the chest. In addition, the guy said that when the man exhaled, a cracking sound could be heard. This symptom clearly alerted Professor Goem. The young specialist continued to say that the appearance of an unexplained crackling sound in the throat of an adult, without problems with the respiratory tract, could mean that a swollen aorta is pressing on a nerve. Kim Yun-chan also reported that judging by the patient's indicators, it was possible to judge the presence of paroxysmal tachycardia. The main character continued to say that because the man was brought in with a fracture, they were now going to take him to the orthopedists. The guy was afraid that when the patient was released to operate, it would be too late, so he called the professor. After hearing all this, Professor Goem concluded that it was a difficult task. The intern literally asked the man to steal a patient from the orthopedist, and of course he was not going to listen to the inexperienced guy. While the professor stood at the traffic light, he had a few more moments to think. This became the decisive moment in this situation. Gohem's car suddenly took off, turned around and changed lanes. The man asked Kim Yun-chan to wait for him and promised that he would soon return to the hospital. The professor also said that it was the main character who diagnosed the man, so now he should not let him go. The young specialist was glad that this phone call worked, but now he had little time left, so he could not delay. The guy thought that first he needed to contact the anesthesiologists who would have to participate in the operation. At that moment, the main character heard someone's footsteps behind him. Kim Yun-chan immediately turned around to see who had just passed by him. The man turned to Ju Sang-gi and asked what was wrong with the patient, and it turned out that the patient, Hyo Min-ho, was currently undergoing a CT scan. Taking a closer look, the main character was shocked because this man was an orthopedic surgeon named Park Chang-sik. This doctor was the one who appeared weak in front of the strong and strong in front of the weak. He was also incompetent and very proud. Kim Yun-chan realized that now the chance that his opinion would be taken into account was practically zero. But for the guy now, the most important thing was to gain time. Smiling slyly, the main character put the telephone receiver to his ear, thinking at the same time that in order to resolve this situation, he needed to contact someone. Meanwhile, calm reigned in the thoracic surgery department. Everyone was busy with their work and did not even imagine what would happen at the end of this working day. Han Sang Hun slowly took the documents to the reception desk and looked forward to his quick return home. Suddenly, the man's phone rang in his pocket, which was completely inopportune. The professor answered the call without enthusiasm, and you can't even guess who wanted to contact him. A moment later, the man confirmed that he was Han Sang Hun from the thoracic surgery department of Sebastian Hospital. Meanwhile, Professor Goem's car quickly drove up to the hospital and stopped in the parking lot. Soon the man was already running quickly through the corridors, trying not to waste precious time. Having run into the necessary department, the professor began to look around, constantly not understanding where Kim Yun-chan, who was supposed to be waiting for him here, had gone. Suddenly, something caught Professor Goem's attention, causing him to immediately forget about the main character. The man saw intern Park Chang-sik from the orthopedic department and his resident Ju Sang-gi. The patient was also still there. Park Chang-sik, studying the documents, said that the patient had a cervical vertebrae injury, and there was even a small crack in the 7th vertebra. The man also said that since the spinal cord was damaged, the patient should have been reported to the neurosurgery department and given an MRI. Suddenly, someone from behind said that this was not necessary. Professor Goem believed that this patient needed urgent surgery in his department. Park Chang-sik was very surprised and did not understand why the man was saying this. The professor did not explain anything, and asking his colleague not to interfere, prepared to examine the patient. Hyo Min-ho's stomach and was very surprised when he felt that his stomach was pulsating like crazy, as if it was about to explode. Suddenly, a nurse approached the doctors and informed them that the results of the patient's chest scan had arrived. Ju Sang-ji-woo was very surprised because he had not requested this examination. The nurse said that these results were requested by some intern, who insisted that this was an order from Professor Goem. Hearing this, the man rudely snatched the picture from the nurse's hands and began to examine it carefully. All this time, the professor was wondering where the main character had gone, but now it became clear to him that he had gone to deceive the doctors on his behalf. Park Chang-sik still didn't understand what was happening and asked the professor if this case wasn't under the jurisdiction of his department. Suddenly, Professor Goem quickly approached the man and asked if he really thought that if he tried hard enough, he would also become a professor. Goem really didn't like the fact that a charlatan like Park Chang-sik was holding a patient, and he, a real doctor, had to put up with it. Park Chang-sik was outraged by this insult and therefore loudly declared that he too was a doctor, but the professor denied this. The man believed that a real doctor simply could not help but notice the patient's aortic dissection. Park Chang-sik was surprised by this and did not understand why his colleagues suddenly started talking about it. However, the man continued to stand his ground and say that the patient had a simple dislocation of the cervical vertebrae and that this was the reason for his neck pain. Then Professor Goem looked at the man with a stern gaze and asked if he was ready to take responsibility in case of a mistake. Without a moment's hesitation, Park Chang-sik confirmed it. Hearing this, Professor Goem handed the man the picture and asked him to look at it. At that moment, another colleague of theirs was already running up to the doctors. The man grabbed the professor by the shoulder and said that he shouldn't have behaved like that and that everything had its limits. Professor Han Sang Hun demanded that his colleagues stop arguing in front of everyone. The man did not know what exactly was going on, but asked Professor Goem not to make a big deal out of nothing and to leave the patient to Park Chang-sik. Man also said that if there was a need, they would transfer the patient to the thoracic surgery department. Hearing all this, Gokum calmly turned to the man. The professor showed the picture and asked his colleague to look at it and repeat everything he had said to his face again. Han Sang-man was shocked by what he saw in the photo because he didn't expect anything like that at all. From what was shown in the picture, any doctor would have realized that the patient had an aortic dissection. The man's heart was literally bleeding. Professor Gokum went on to say that taking a heart scan of a victim who had fallen was a basic procedure, but due to Park Chang-sik's incompetence, the patient almost missed his golden time. After this, the man took the patient with him for the last time, saying that if necessary, he would bring him back to the orthopedics department. Han Sang-man was very unhappy with his subordinate and loudly asked why he didn't take a photo. Park Chang-sik could only ask for forgiveness. Meanwhile, Professor Goem had already asked the nurse to call the thoracic surgery department and asked them to replace Han Sang Hun. Then it was time to prepare the patient for transportation. At that moment, the phone in the man's pocket rang. Someone was trying to urgently contact him. Hun calling. He was interested in whether the man had already arrived at the hospital. The professor confirmed this and at the same time asked to prepare the operating room for an emergency operation. Surprisingly, everything was already prepared and everyone was waiting only for Goham. The professor was very surprised by what he heard because he did not understand where Han Sang Hun learned about the need to prepare the operating room. This caused bewilderment in the man because he believed that it was Professor Gokum who had ordered the urgent preparation of everything necessary for the operation on a patient with aortic dissection. Han Sang Hun also added that information about this was relayed by intern Kim Yoon Chan, who worked in their department last month. The blood type and other important data had already been accepted and analyzed thanks to the same guy. Professor Goem seemed to be not at all delighted with what he heard, but he did not have time for indignation now. Meanwhile, Kim Yoon Chan quickly ran to the professor, thinking along the way that he had prepared everything he could in advance, from contacting an anesthesiologist to providing blood. Now the guy could only hope that Professor Goham would be able to convince the orthopedic specialists. At that moment, the main character just saw the man. Following the professor on the couch was his patient Kim Yoon Chan, who breathed a sigh of relief because this meant that the man had managed to convince his colleagues. Without wasting any time, the intern ran up to the professor and happily addressed him, believing that now everything would be fine. The main character was about to thank the man for agreeing to come, but suddenly the professor interrupted him in a rude voice. Suddenly, Gokum briefly asked if Kim Yoon-chan really wanted to go to prison. These words discouraged the guy. The man didn't like the fact that the main character, instead of waiting for him, was doing some amateur work while hiding behind his name. Kim Yoon-chan immediately began to apologize and justify himself by saying that he did it because they had no time to hesitate. To this, the man replied that a hospital of such a scale as this had its own system of functioning, and of course there was nothing good in the jumping gear, which the main character now was. Kim Yoon-chan had no intention of arguing with the professor, so he bowed low and, fully admitting his guilt, asked for forgiveness again. Hearing this, Professor Goem hoped that something like this would not happen again, but the guy, of course, could not make such a promise. Kim Yoon-chan suddenly raised his head up and looked at the man and continued to say that it was wrong of him to ignore the required procedures. However, the guy honestly admitted that if something like this happens again, he will undoubtedly do the same as he did today. The main character was ready to do anything just to get closer to saving the patient. These words and the confidence with which they were said clearly revealed Professor Goem. It seemed like the man had nothing to say to that, so he just quietly called Kim Yoon-chan a reckless boy. The next moment, the professor's mood changed dramatically. He patted the protagonist on the shoulders and praised him. Kim Yun-chan was taken aback by this, and for a while he silently looked at his mentor with uncomprehending eyes. The man continued to say that the young intern's position was much better than killing a patient while trying to question the system. The professor allowed the boy to act at his own discretion if something similar happened again, and promised to take full responsibility. Gokum then asked Kim Yun-chan to move, since he was tasked with transporting the patient and overseeing the upcoming operation. As soon as the guy's face showed surprise at what he heard, the man immediately reminded the main character of his promise not to let his patient go until the very end. Soon the woman received news that her husband had been hospitalized and was about to undergo surgery. Because of this, Vun's mother began to become very nervous. When everything was ready, Professor Goem announced the start of the aortic replacement operation, in which the torn aorta was replaced with an artificial blood vessel. The man warned his colleagues that now they had no right to make a mistake, so everyone had to remain calm. The professor was ready to begin the complex operation, but before that, he compared the patient's condition to a bomb that did not have a timer. Finally, the man began making a small incision with a sharp scalpel to prepare a place for the artificial blood vessel. At that very moment, a rapid stream of his patient's blood sprayed at the surgeon, something he did not expect at all. Everyone present was shocked that the bleeding began as soon as the incision was made, and therefore they were very afraid that if this continued, the success of the operation could not be guaranteed. The assistants began to worry because the patient's blood had gotten directly on Professor Goem, and immediately began asking if everything was okay with him. To this, the man loudly demanded that his subordinates focus on the operation and saving the patient's life. The professor scolded the assistants and believed that if they had time to worry about him and the patient too, then everyone should calm down and concentrate. Kim Yun-chan, who was watching what was happening closely, already understood that things were not going very well. The thing was that the diameter of the aorta was usually about 2 centimeters, but in the patient it had already stretched to 7 centimeters. In addition, the membrane of the ascending aorta ruptured and bleeding resumed. Now it was necessary to quickly replace the aorta with an artificial blood vessel before it burst. This operation was of increased complexity and required not only precision, but also speed. From that moment on, everything was very serious, which could not help but cause excitement among everyone present. Professor Gohem understood what a great responsibility lay on him and therefore tried with all his might not to give in to emotions. That evening, only the patient's wife was allowed to worry and cry, and she was very worried about her husband. The woman mentally asked the doctors to save the father of her child. This model reached the surgeon's hands, so very soon he began his work. Goham's movements were precise and coordinated. Each movement brought him closer to the desired result, so they were carefully thought out in advance. Finally, the man began to smile widely, which was visible even through the mask. The attachment of the artificial blood vessel was successfully completed. The foreign object was skillfully sewn into place by the surgeon, as if it had always been there. The man then turned to his assistants, who were very impressed with what they saw, and asked them to apply surgical stitches. Finally coming to their senses, everyone present began to loudly thank Professor Goem for his unsurpassed work. Kim Yun-chan was no exception. The boy looked at the man with wide eyes and thought that this surgeon's work was practically a miracle. The main character, without exaggeration, considered Professor Goem to be the best professional in the country. Everyone else probably shared the same opinion. Now, Kim Yun-chan's greatest wish was that in this new life he would become as great a doctor as Professor Gohem. Some time passed. The patient was moved to the ward after a successful operation, so the interns only had to clean up the operating room. Soon one of the guys asked permission to leave early because he still had other things to do. Kim Yun-chan was not against it and finally praised him for his good work. Hoon approached the main character and also praised him for his efforts shown today. Then the man, smiling kindly, asked if the guy had finished cleaning yet. Hearing a positive answer, the smile on the surgeon's face suddenly disappeared. It was clear that Han Sang Hun needed something from the main character. Finally, he said directly that they needed to talk about something. Hearing this, Kim Yun-chan visibly tensed up. Despite the fact that it was already deep night, lights were still on in many of the windows of Sebastian's hospital. This quiet time of day was perfect for conversation, so Han Sang Hun took the boy outside so that no one would disturb them. Having handed the main character some coffee, the man asked whether he really was the one who first identified the patient's aortic dissection. Han Sang Hun thought it was amazing that the guy did it only with the help of physical diagnostics and without the help of ultrasound. Kim Yun-chan claimed that it was just luck. The man asked his interlocutor not to be modest and insisted that the patient survived only thanks to the gifted intern. The protagonist was surprised that he was not scolded for excessive arrogance. Unexpectedly, Han Sang Hun stopped in his tracks because he thought that now was the right moment to express another thought of his regarding everything that had happened. The next moment, the man rudely declared that this was enough praise for the main character. Hearing this, Kim Yun-chan's expression immediately changed. In fact, he had no doubt that everything would end exactly like this. Han Sang Hun asked the boy not to worry and advised him not to do anything like that again. The protagonist asked if the man was telling him this because he would ignore the proper procedure. In part, this was indeed true. Then Han Sang Hun, smiling again, asked the guy what it was like to be present at the operation, since interns rarely had the chance to personally attend such a serious event. Without thinking twice, Kim Yun-chan replied that it was an honor for him, and these were not empty words. The man did not expect any other reaction because few surgeons could compare in skills with Professor Goem. Han Sang Hun continued to say that he also respected the professor as a doctor. These words sharpened the protagonist's attention. The man had already heard about the conflict with specialists from the orthopedic department that arose during the patient's transportation. Han Sang Hun regretfully said that he could not do anything in that situation, and he was annoyed that he could not resolve the conflict in a more peaceful way. The man acknowledged that Professor Gohem's abilities were truly outstanding, and that his patients always came first. Hun's opinion, the professor was too neglectful of the other hospital staff. That is why not everyone had a good attitude toward the professor, and there were rumors that he looked down on everyone. Han Sang Hun continued to say that the orthopedic department had been friendly towards the thoracic surgery department, but after what happened today, things would definitely change. Suddenly, the man said that it would have been much better if the main character had told him everything first. Kim Yun-chan was shocked by what he heard and did not immediately understand what his interlocutor meant. Han Sang Hun insisted that he wasn't trying to blame the guy, but the main character still didn't like those words. Kim Yun-chan was sure that if he told Han Sang Hun everything, he would have made an agreement with the orthopedist without thinking about the patient at all. That is why the main character did not approach the man from the very beginning and simply ignored his participation in this matter. Han Sang Hun continued to say that this was the last time their department could receive support from the government, but at the professor's meeting, they were refused. These words angered the main character because he believed that this doctor was always only interested in politics and not in patients. Han Sang Hun wanted the boy to know that there were few people in the hospital who supported their department, so their every move was under surveillance. The man then compared Professor Goem to an African lion, saying that he had both skills and character and truly deserved the title of King of the Prairies. However, if the lion was old and sick, the hyenas who had previously only observed him would gather in a pack and kill him, which was very cruel. It was known that among the inhabitants of the prairies, hyenas had the strongest jaws. However, they did not bother themselves and used the lion to get food. Han Sang Hun was curious about what the main character thought about this and who he thought he was most similar to. At that moment, Kim Yun-chan realized that his next words would be very important. They will show whether the boy will follow the lion in the person of Professor Goem, or whether he will decide to join the pack of hyenas. Of course, all this was in order to one day attack a weakened lion. The guy thought that given how Han Sang Hun quickly revealed his true feelings, he probably really wanted it. After a short thought, the protagonist said that it was difficult for him to determine his position. Kim Yun-chan claimed that depending on his choice, the consequences that awaited him were too different, so he needed more time to think. Han Sang Hun was not against it, and asked the guy to think carefully about his words. But the main character had already decided that in this life, he would not allow a man to influence him. It was Kim Yun-chan who intended to become another lion who would protect the king of the prairies if the hyenas tried to attack him. Some time passed. A small bus was moving quickly along the highway, giving passengers the opportunity to admire nature away from the noisy city. Kim Yun-chan stared out the window, thinking about everything that had happened to him recently. Soon the guy arrived at the place he needed to visit to achieve his goals. It was a small hospital that was affiliated with Sebastian Hospital in Jongseon. Even though it was a branch of the best hospital in Korea, the building looked shabby and unattractive. The service system here was so bad that it was nicknamed the Road to Hell, but it allowed for a wealth of practical experience to be accumulated. For interns, it was a good way to improve their skills in Spartan conditions. Kim Yun-chan walked into the main hall and looked around, wondering why there was no one there. Suddenly, the main character heard a loud male voice behind him, asking to immediately clear the way. Turning around, The guy saw a man in a white coat who was transporting an emergency patient. Taking a closer look at the victim, Kim Yun-chan remembered the mine accident that had already happened in his past life. One look at the victim was enough to determine that his blood vessels were torn and his stomach was swollen like a ball. If everything was already so advanced, it means that the spleen, pancreas, and liver were ruptured. The man also had swelling on his chest and visible subcutaneous tumors which were caused by the injury. Kim Yun-chan was sure that there was no guarantee of survival, even if surgery were performed immediately. However, the professor loudly asked that nurse Hwang Jin-hee called Professor Park Han from the anesthesiology department. The woman reported that all the doctors living there had left for the main office in Seoul, which did not make the man happy at all. The professor still decided to perform the operation, so it was necessary to prepare the operating room. The nurse asked if the man was really going to perform it alone. The professor replied that he had no other choice, so he asked the woman to hurry up and help him. Suddenly, the main character loudly addressed the hospital staff in order to attract their attention to himself. Kim Yun-chan said that with the man's permission, he was ready to help him with the operation. The professor was very surprised by what he heard, because he saw this guy for the first time and did not understand what to expect from him. Without wasting any time, the man asked what the main character was doing there. From the nurse's reaction, it was clear that she immediately understood everything. Hwang Jin-hee said that this guy was an intern who was sent to their hospital today. The professor immediately asked if the main character had experience working in an operating room and if he knew what a scalpel looked like. Despite the positive answer, the man still did not trust the intern, but was ready to entrust him with several minor tasks. As a result, the professor quickly went to the operating room, asking Kim Yun-chan to change his clothes and urgently come to his aid. After some time, the operating room door closed hermetically. Everything necessary was already inside. The professor and his assistants quickly got to work in order to at least try to save the patient. The first thing the man did was ask the nurse to inject the victim with fibrin, which was a protein necessary for blood clotting. Suddenly, the professor exclaimed loudly as if he did not expect to see something like this. Nurse Hwang Jin-hee, frightened by this, asked if everything was okay. It turned out that the man was looking at his patient's internal organs and thinking that things couldn't get any worse. A couple more minutes and it could have been too late. The professor realistically assessed his capabilities and therefore admitted that he could not cope alone. So he needed to temporarily clamp the patient's vessels. As soon as the man thought about this, Kim Yun-chan handed him the vascular clamp without further ado, which momentarily discouraged the professor. He couldn't explain how the intern could know what he needed now. Still, the man was very surprised to assume that the inexperienced guy understood what he was about to do. These thoughts were suddenly interrupted by an excited nurse who informed the professor that they had few bags of blood. This news did not please the man at all. The professor reacted quickly and asked the woman to call the nearest hospital and ask for blood. At this point, the main character turned to the professor and suggested that he begin to administer the saline solution to the maximum. The man was again very surprised. He simply could not believe that despite the stressful situation, the guy calmly offered a good method of lowering the pressure in the vessels by introducing a saline solution. Kim Yun-chan really looked absolutely calm and looked at the professor with concentration, expecting new requests from him. Because of this, the professor did not understand at all what was actually happening here. For him, it seemed unrealistic. After some time, the operation was completed. The tired employees could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Professor Park Hwan praised his colleague for his good work and reported that they completed everything in 10 hours. He then turned to the main character and introduced himself. It was a great honor for Kim Yun-chan to meet him. The man claimed that although the guy was an assistant at this operation, he looked like a real professor. The main character, as always, claimed that he was just lucky. Before leaving the operating room, Professor Lee also praised Kim Yun-chan and asked him to come to his office after he changed his clothes. Hearing this, Professor Park Hwan began to smile slyly, as if he already knew what the conversation would be about. Soon, the protagonist arrived at Professor Lee's office to talk to him for the first time in a favorable environment. The man still didn't dare to start a conversation and only stared at the guy until he finally turned to him. The first thing the professor asked was whether Kim Yun-chan was really an intern. The guy didn't understand what his interlocutor meant. The man explained that he asked this question because the main character understood perfectly well what was happening and answered accordingly. Kim Yun-chan insisted that he simply learned all this, but the professor thought otherwise. The man claimed that the intern only did what he had to do at the right time, which meant he understood the entire procedure. The professor began to express his guess about this, but Kim Yun-chan no longer listened to him. The main character understood that he stood out a lot for the intern, but the situation was extreme, and therefore he could not act differently. Suddenly the man asked if the boy was a fool. These words greatly discouraged Kim Yun-chan. Without explaining anything, the professor continued to say that he already knew that the person sitting in front of him was the same student who performed the pericardiocentesis. The protagonist confirmed this. The man then suggested that Professor Gokum had taught the boy a lot when he worked in the thoracic surgery department. Kim Yun-chan claimed that he had learned a lot from him. Professor Lee then hoped that the intern would also study well in this hospital, because this knowledge would be useful to him when he began working as a surgeon. Suddenly the man said that if it came to that, the guy needed to improve his posture, and for that someone was supposed to arrive any minute. At that very moment, someone knocked on the door, after which a man wearing a motorcycle helmet entered the office. Kim Yun-chan was very surprised by the sudden appearance of the stranger and wondered who this person was. Professor Lee praised the man for showing up on time and asked if everything was ready. The stranger briefly confirmed this while placing a large box on the table. The main character continued to watch what was happening closely, completely unaware of what would happen next. Suddenly, the stranger took off his helmet. This man turned out to be an ordinary old man who set to work with a smile on his face. The elderly man quickly began to lay out the food on the table that he had just brought on behalf of Professor Lee. When everything was ready, the old man announced that his establishment had prepared a generous dinner for the newcomer, so he should begin eating unnoticed. The courier also claimed that despite the professor's stern appearance, he had a soft heart, and all of this was his special order. Professor Lee clearly didn't like the fact that his friend started to blab too much, so he quickly began to escort him out of the office. The man then said that their hospital was located next to a coal mine, and therefore they had many patients with injuries. At the same time, there was a shortage of workers in the institution. That is why the professor asked the main character to devote all his time to work, and for this he needed to eat more. Kim Yun-chan tried to explain that there was too much food for him alone, and therefore offered to eat together, but the man had already left. The main character was shocked by the situation he found himself in, because he didn't know how he was going to eat all that food alone. Park Hwan, who met the man, was sure that Professor Lee liked the intern, even though he said that he had not yet made up his mind about him. After this day, the main character began his working days, which he had been so eager to achieve. Throughout these days, the guy was wondering whether Lee Sang-jun would notice him and appreciate his skills. Among other things, Kim Yun-chan was surprised by how much attention the professor paid to him when he had time for it. Nurse Hwang Jin-hee, watching this, could tell without a doubt that Lee Sang-jun really liked intern Kim. Park Hwan believed that the main character deserved this treatment because thanks to his appearance here and his fruitful work, Lee Sang-jun became less nervous. Suddenly, one of the hospital employees approached the nurse and reported that the people they were waiting for had already arrived. It turned out that the doctors who went to Seoul had finally returned, and now Kim Yun-chan could allow himself to breathe a sigh of relief. The guy was undoubtedly happy about this. Coming out into the corridor, the main character was stunned by what he saw. For him, this meeting was a complete surprise. The guy couldn't believe that Dr. Yunina came to this hospital to work here. Coming closer, the intern asked if the girl had come to help them. Dr. Yun-ina was glad to see the main character. She said that she was planning to specialize in pediatric surgery, so she decided to apply to this hospital to learn everything in advance. Suddenly, the girl fell silent mid-sentence as if she could not express her thoughts correctly. Finally, Dr. Yun-ina, with a smile on her face, said that she came here also because she fell in love with Internet Kim. The main character heard these words, was stunned and opened his eyes wide in surprise, and at the same time turned red from embarrassment. The plot of this story returned a couple of weeks ago to the night in which a complex operation was performed to implant an artificial blood vessel. Dr. Yunina sat outside the operating room and tried to calm the patient's wife, who was very worried. The woman understood the complexity of this situation, so there was little she could do to help now. Dr. Yun-ina blamed herself for what happened because if she had taken Kim Yun-chan's words on faith, then everything could have been avoided. The woman was ready to go back right now and, together with the main character, try with all her might to convince the man to undergo an examination. Yun-ina was very nervous just from the thought that something irreparable could happen to the patient. Suddenly, the operating room door opened sharply and Professor Goem began to emerge from it. The woman immediately contacted the doctor and asked about her husband's condition. Before answering, the man asked whether the woman was the patient Min-ho's caregiver. Having received confirmation of this, Gokum asked the woman not to worry, because the operation was successful and all that remained was to observe the man's condition. Dr. Yunina didn't listen to the professor at all because her attention was completely focused on another person. The woman stared at Kim Yun-chan, who was still in the operating room and was being praised for his good work. The woman was struck by the protagonist's smile and how confident he looked in that blue surgical gown. This image was imprinted in Yun-ina's memory for a long time, and now she couldn't just forget it. I remember all this. The woman assumed that it was at that moment that she fell in love with the intern Kim as a doctor. The main character responded to this that the woman needed to be told everything in exactly this form from the very beginning. The guy thought that someone could hear all this and misunderstand. Yuninu noticed that their conversation was being eavesdropped on, so she joked that everyone would soon find out about it. She then asked Kim Yun-chan to take care of her for these 2 months with a smile on her face. The main character had no choice but to accept this request. Of course, he himself was happy to fulfill it. In the end, our heroes shook hands, and from that moment their joint work began. The very next day, Dr. Yun-ina received her first patient at this hospital. At this time, in the same ward, the main character was carrying out the necessary procedures for another patient. Yun-ina praised the child for his bravery and said that now the splinter was not scary. Nurse Hwang Jin-hee, watching all this work, was very pleased. At first, she was worried when all the doctors ran away from this hospital, but thanks to Yun-ina and Kim Yun-chan, she had much less work. However, there was one factor that greatly irritated the nurse and did not give her peace. The conversation was about another new employee who had arrived the other day and who had not particularly distinguished himself as a hard worker. At some point, Hwang Jin-hee got tired of this, so she turned to the man with displeasure. She asked why the man had taken out so many accounting reports and why the newly arrived director, who had just gotten used to the office, asked to bring reports for the last 2 years. At that moment, the man remembered the director's order to bring him the documents, and so, without explaining anything, he suddenly jumped up and ran away. Nurse Hwang Jin-hee was unhappy that her questions remained unanswered, but there was nothing she could do about it. The woman was also very worried about this new hospital director, about whom almost nothing was known. The nurse did not understand why the man began checking the accounting department as soon as he took up his post. Be that as it may, the woman, even without knowing all the details, could have assumed that chaos might soon reign in this hospital. The nurse didn't even realize that right now, in the new director's office, all her worries were stopped by reality. June, who was not born to be there, was called into the office for a serious conversation. In the midst of a long silence, the director asked the man how long he had worked there. The professor briefly replied that he had worked at this hospital for about 3 years. The director then asked whether it was difficult for the man, since with his skills, he could have worked in much better conditions. Lee Sang-jun assured that he had a good time working here. The modesty of the doctor, who had cured more than 400 patients, surprised the director. However, there remained one very important point that haunted the new leader. The man claimed that of all these patients, less than half paid the bill he was given. These words touched the professor. At that moment, he realized what this whole conversation would be about. Meanwhile, the director had already placed the ledger for the last 2 years on the table and asked what the professor could say about it. The man claimed that upon closer inspection, he discovered a horrific deficit, which amounted to more than 2 million over 2 years, which could lead to bankruptcy. The director also heard that whenever an urgent patient arrived, Professor Lee Sang-jun would sign the agreement form himself instead of the patient's guardian. The director was ready to forget about all this, but asked the man that from now on, no surgical operations would be performed without consent. Suddenly, Professor Lee Sang-jun asked in a rude voice what would happen if he refused to do this. These words discouraged the director. The professor continued to say that this hospital was originally built to improve local medical care, for which the state poured huge amounts of money every year. The professor was outraged that the director enjoyed this financial advantage from the state and still talked about closing the hospital and turning away urgent patients. Lee Sang-jun continued to say that it was the only hospital in the area, so he wanted this place to be the charity it was intended to be. It was clear that the director was very indignant about everything that had been said above, but he could not say anything in response. After this, there was absolute silence in the office, which did not at all resemble an atmosphere favorable for resolving the conflict. In the end, the professor, considering that the conversation was over, began to leave because it was time for him to work. Suddenly, the director addressed the man without letting him leave the office. Without hiding his contempt, the director said that if Professor Lee Sang-jun left now, he would greatly regret it. To this, the man, without even turning to your interlocutor, briefly replied that he had nothing to regret. After this, the office door closed, which testified to the principled nature of the professor's position. Very soon, rumors began to spread throughout the hospital that the newly arrived director had quarreled with Professor Lee and even demanded a report of all his expenses. The manager tried to stop Lee Sang-jun and asked him to make concessions to resolve the conflict, but talking to him was like walking on thin ice. This whole situation also affected our heroes, who only wanted to work productively and help people. Dr. Yoon-ina sighed heavily and said that there had not been a single calm day lately. Kim Yun-chan agreed with this because he could already feel the tension in the air. The woman was afraid that if everything continued like this, it would come to a fight. The main character did not believe this because the professor seemed calm and neat to him. Suddenly, Dr. Yoon-ina said that the guy was wrong and had no idea what her uncle was like when it came to patients. Kim Yun-chan was shocked by what he heard. Only when the woman saw the reaction of her interlocutor did she realize that she had said too much. Yoon-ina immediately began to say that it was a secret. Kim Yun-chan could not verify what he heard for some time. Soon the guy came to his senses and suggested that the woman most likely came to this hospital precisely because of Professor Yun-in confirmed this. From this answer, the protagonist concluded that the woman and Professor Lee Sang-jun had a good relationship. Yoon-ina thoughtfully agreed with this. Suddenly she began to tell that her father died quite early. Kim Yun-chan was touched by these words because he was very familiar with them. Yoon-ina continued to say that she perceived her uncle as her father, although it was a rather difficult topic for her. To this, Kim Yun-chan said in an uncertain voice that his father had also already passed away, so he understood his interlocutor well. The guy also said that it had seemed to him for a long time that he and Yoon-ina were comrades in misfortune. The woman was glad that she could discuss this with someone. She then asked if the main character often visited his mother. Kim Yun-chan replied that he would like to visit her more often, but she lived very far away. However, it didn't matter to him. He still planned to visit his mother tomorrow on his day off. Despite the distance, the guy wanted to visit his mother more often because she had to go through a lot when she raised him alone. The main character said these words only 15 hours ago, but now, looking at the wounded elderly woman, he did not understand what he should do. People around were panicking and asking for someone to call an ambulance. Kim Yun-chan wondered why this happened now. That morning, the main character arrived at the tourist base, which was located among the picturesque mountains. The guy was dressed appropriately and seemed to be about to go on one of the tourist routes. With his heart full of delight, Kim Yun-chan looked around the room, looking for a specific person. Finally, a familiar female voice addressed the main character and drew his attention to itself. The woman greeted the guy with a sincere smile on her face and called him over. For Kim Yun-chan, this day began with a long-awaited meeting with his mother. In the main character's past life, his mother went through a lot. Her husband, who worked in the mines, died of pneumoconiosis caused by inhaling industrial dust. The woman raised her child alone and died of pancreatic cancer. Kim Yun-chan took his mother's passing very hard, and as a doctor, he regretted that he had missed her illness. Once the main character got a second chance, he promised himself something. Kim Yun-chan's mother encouraged the boy, and with a sincere smile on her face said that they were almost there. The main character was breathing heavily from fatigue, but was happy that he was spending time with his mother. In this life, Kim Yun-chan wanted nothing more than to make all of her dreams come true. The woman admired the magnificent view of nature from a high hill and said that she had long wanted to come here with her son. She thanked Kim Yun-chan for fulfilling her wish. The guy was ready to fulfill everything his mother wished, so he asked her not to hide anything. The main character also reminded the woman about the examination for which he had already registered her. After this, the walk continued, but before that, our heroes decided to have lunch in the middle of nature. Suddenly, a loud scream was heard nearby, which attracted the attention of Kim Yun-chan and his mother. A moment later, the main character heard that someone had fallen from a great height, and the victim needed help. Without wasting any time, the guy jumped up and ran in the direction from which he heard the scream, asking his mother to call the emergency services. Having run up to the scene of events, the main character began to push aside the people who were blocking his path and loudly say that he was a doctor. Seeing the elderly woman lying on the ground, the guy breathed a sigh of relief because she was not bleeding heavily yet. However, Kim Yun-chan shouldn't relax. Now he needed to check whether the victim had internal bleeding or hypotensive shock. The main character needed to get down quickly, so he turned to the people and asked if anyone had a rope. Fortunately, the necessary thing was quickly found. As he was going down, the guy realized that it was quite high here, so things could be much worse for the victim than he thought. When Kim Yun-chan came down, there were already some people near the old woman who didn't know what to do and intended to shake the old woman so that she would come to her senses. The man began to shake the victim and asked if everything was okay with her, but there was no answer. The main character became very worried when he saw this. Running closer, the main character asked not to shake the victim, as she could have damaged internal organs or broken bones. Having carefully turned the elderly woman onto her back, Kim Yun-chan first decided to check whether she was conscious, and therefore turned to her and asked if she had heard him. Having received no answer, the guy put his hand to the victim's face and realized that although she was unconscious, she was still breathing. Next, Kim Yun-chan took the elderly woman's hand and lightly pressed his fingers on the right spot in order to check her pulse. Let it be too fast and not periodic. The guy suspected low blood pressure due to vasodilation, which indicated a problem with the internal organs. Urgent action was needed, so Kim Yun-chan asked a man standing nearby to carefully lift the victim's legs above her chest. The protagonist knew that in order to maintain at least some pressure and temperature, it was necessary to ensure the most comfortable position so that the blood continued to circulate. Kim Yun-chang was about to give a few more orders, but suddenly something else caught his attention. The guy saw a lacerated wound on the elderly woman's head and assumed that this was most likely why she lost consciousness. Having examined the victim from head to toe once again, the main character decided that everything was not so good. Luckily, Kim Yun-chan had brought a first aid kit with him, which was exactly what he needed for such cases. The guy didn't expect that he would need the first aid kit today, but he was glad that he took it. The main character immediately began to treat the wound. Now, the most terrible thing, in Kim Yun-chan's opinion, was the injury to the abdominal organs. The guy really hoped that the emergency services would arrive before the hypotensive shock passed. Meanwhile, the main character's mother had already met the ambulance workers and showed them exactly where they should go. At this moment, Kim Yun-chan breathed a sigh of relief and thought that it was now time for the operation. After some time, the emergency vehicle stopped near the hospital. Workers began to quickly transport the victim. Kim Yun-chan told Professor Lee Sang-jun what had happened and suggested that the elderly woman had a ruptured spleen with intra-abdominal bleeding. The man, hearing this, asked if anything else was known about the victim's condition. The guy said that the ambulance workers suspected hematuria. It was a condition in which blood was found in the urine, indicating kidney problems. Professor Lee Sang-jun was shocked by what he heard, because he already understood that this would not be an easy matter. The man praised the main character for his good work and said that he would take further action himself. At this moment, the manager blocked the doctor and his patient's path and ordered them to stop. The professor demanded that the man step aside because it was an emergency, but the manager insisted that the patient had no relatives. Lee Sang-jun loudly declared that he would take responsibility himself, so the manager should get out of the way. At that moment, the director appeared from around the corner and asked how he was going to take responsibility. The man continues to say that it was precisely because of the professor's behavior that their hospital's finances reached rock bottom. In response to this, Lee Sang-jun insisted that this hospital was almost a charity organization, so the director had to follow very carefully or he would simply kill the patient. The director replied that his hospital would not accept this patient, so the professor should send him to another institution. Kim Yun-chan listened attentively to all this and could not believe that the director really said such things. The guy was angry but did not know what to do. Unexpectedly, Professor Lee Sang-jun demonstratively tore off his name badge from his robe. Throwing it at the manager, the man declared that the new hospital director was an aspiring killer. After this, the professor pushed the scoundrel aside and declared that he could do whatever he wanted with him, but he would still perform the operation. The manager was very worried and concerned about the director, who clearly harbored a grudge against Professor Kim Yun-chan, already understood that Lee Sang-jun was in trouble ahead. Nevertheless, the main character was glad that everything worked out, and now the victim will receive vital help. Now all the boy could do was wait and believe. He mentally turned to someone and asked them to take care of Professor Lee Sang-jun. After some time, deep night fell. The city was enveloped in a deep sleep, so there was no light in any of the windows. Kim Yun-chan, of course, had already been asleep for a long time because tomorrow morning his next working day would begin. Suddenly, the main character experienced a strange feeling in his sleep, as if he was floating. The chill that enveloped his body filled him with memories and reminded him of what happened not so long ago. Kim Yun-chan immediately remembered that he had a similar feeling when he died in his past life. Then the guy experienced a warm and ringing feeling, the reason for which he could not yet explain. Suddenly, the main character saw a bright light that seemed familiar to him. It was exactly the same light he saw on the very day he got his second chance. Kim Yun-chan opened his eyes but did not yet fully realize that he was already awake. A moment later, the guy was overcome with anxiety because he was afraid of forgetting the feelings that he had just frightened. The main character jumped up from his seat, breathing hard, and began to wonder what kind of feelings were glimmering in his heart. It seemed to the boy that the light he saw seemed to have found its way straight into his heart. Soon another working day began at Sebastian's hospital. All the staff were already there. The new hospital director was also already in his office and talking to someone on the phone. The man thanked the management for their support and hoped that the problem would be resolved next week. After this, the conversation was finished. The man carefully put the telephone receiver back in place while thinking about everything that had just been discussed. The result of this conversation made the director smile. He was very pleased that he had finally achieved his goal. The man was sure that Professor Lee Sang-jun would now have serious problems. Meanwhile, the hospital staff was still unaware of the conversation that had taken place and continued to go about their routine business. Only the manager was talking carefree to someone on the phone and discussing the professor and his subordinate position. The man told his interlocutor that the professor would have problems because he accepted patients without guardians. Kim Yun-chan heard all this. The manager then stated that even such a famous and good professor as Lee Sang-jun the end will come next week. Huang approached the man, Jin-hee, who also heard everything said above. The manager realized that his words had caused discontent, so he began to justify himself by saying that he was simply trying to look competent in the eyes of the new director. To Nurse Huang, Jin-hee clearly didn't like this excuse and the fact that the man was in such a good mood today. The manager, seeing this reaction, began to worry greatly and already assumed that he would be in trouble. At this point, the main character intervened in the conversation and asked what happened to Professor Lee Sang-jun. The manager was surprised that the hospital staff did not yet know all the details, so he decided to tell them everything. Several days passed. Despite everything, the institution continued its work as usual. Kim Yun-chan was caring for his patient, whom he saved in the mountains and who had been in the hospital all this time. The guy conducted several tests to check the condition of the elderly woman. Everything indicated that she was getting better, which couldn't help but please the guy. The patient asked how she could thank the protagonist for his kindness. To this, Kim Yun-chan replied that he was only doing what he had to do. The guy didn't forget that the reason that Grandma Kim was still alive was due to the work of Professor Lee Sang-jun, so he had to thank him. Kim Yun-chan recalled that according to the manager, the next week during a meeting, the removal of Professor Lee would be discussed. The man believed that this was precisely why no one should conflict with the director. These thoughts did not please the main character at all, which is why he involuntarily clenched his hand into a fist. The elderly woman noticed that something was bothering the guy, so she decided to cheer him up. Grandma Kim took the doctor's hand and thanked him again for being with her all the time and encouraging her. Despite her condition at the time, she remembered that it was Kim Yun-chan who held her hand in the ambulance and asked her to fight to the end. The guy was very surprised that at that moment the patient was conscious. The grandmother said that she was also very surprised when she saw a bright light and remembered it very well. The elderly woman also heard that it was the main character who gave her first aid in the mountains, so she believed that the reason she was still here was because of Kim Yun-chan. For all this, Grandma Kim once again thanked her doctor with a sincere smile on her face. At this moment, the main character experienced a strange feeling that was already familiar to him. He remembered that he had the same feeling in a dream a couple of days ago. These were not just emotions, but something much more complicated. Kim Yun-chan felt this feeling endlessly flowing into his heart like a warm light. The main character remembered this clearly, but now he did not understand how this feeling related to Grandma Kim. Suddenly, the elderly woman began to say that she had not even paid for the treatment yet, but she had already had an operation. She assumed that the doctor had problems because of her. Kim Yun-chan began to ask the old woman not to worry about it, because in our time there were many organizations that helped those in need. At that moment, someone's dissatisfied voice was heard in the ward, which attracted the attention of the main character and his patient. The guy saw that this man was the manager, so he immediately asked what brought him here at such an hour. The man showed the hospital bill and asked Kim Yun-chan with displeasure what money he was going to use to pay for the old woman's treatment. The main character insisted that Grandma Kim had just left the rehabilitation department, and now she should rest and not be nervous. The manager responded that he also did not want to talk about this in front of the patient, but such were the rules. At that time, several people were walking down the hospital corridor, an appearance that no one was expecting. The man threw the hospital bill at the patient and asked if she had any money set aside. The manager insisted that otherwise Grandma Kim could no longer stay there and she had to change hospitals. Suddenly, a man in a business suit entered the room, accompanied by several subordinates, and loudly asked what was happening here. Kim Yun-chan was shocked when he saw this man because he knew that it was Congressman Bando. The man began to say that this hospital was established to develop local health care, so it was wrong to so tactlessly rip off patients. Then the congressman rudely addressed the manager and asked if he knew who this elderly woman was and how he dared to treat her like that. The main character was surprised that the congressman knew this grandmother. Suddenly, Grandma Kim approached the congressman and asked him to stop behaving like this. Then she directly asked how the man found out that she was in this hospital. Kim Yun-chan noticed that his patient's tone and behavior had changed. He was very interested in what was going on between her and the congresswoman. The man immediately began asking the grandmother what had happened to her and telling her that as soon as he learned about everything from the secretary, he immediately came here. The congressman insisted that his mother should have contacted him and told him everything. Kim Yun-chan did not expect at all that his patient would turn out to be this man's mother. The elderly woman replied that she was fine, and thanks to Dr. Kim Yun-chan, she was not going to die yet. Hearing this, the congressman immediately turned to the main character, and noting that he was young, asked if he was really an intern. Having received a positive answer, the man asked the guy to call his mother's real doctor. These words did not please Grandma Kim at all. The old woman began to call her son a fool and ask how he dared to treat the man who saved her life like that. She then threatened that if the man did not change immediately, he would cease to be her son. The congressman immediately realized his mistake. The man immediately bowed to Kim Yun-chan and began to ask him for forgiveness for what he said to him. The shocked guy began to assure that everything was fine. Grandma Kim once again emphasized that the main character was a benefactor for her life, so the man should treat him with the deepest respect. The elderly woman also asked that her son sort out the bills for treatment while he was here, because she was already tired of hearing the manager whine. The congressman's subordinates immediately turned their attention to the man, who was about to quietly leave the chamber. This made him very nervous and make excuses. Before leaving, the congressman shook Kim Yun-chan's hand and asked him to take care of his mother. Meanwhile, the congressman's secretary had already approached the manager and asked for 1 minute. The highly worried man did not want any trouble, so he said he was simply following the hospital director's orders. The congressman wanted to speak with the director personally, so he asked the manager to take them to him, and at the same time, he intended to pay for the hospital expenses. After that, Grandma Kim apologized for the fact that the doctor had to listen to all this. She also turned to Ji-suk and asked him to say hello to the main character. One of the men immediately handed the guy his business card and said that he was the secretary of a high-ranking elder. Then Ji-suk bowed low and expressed his deep gratitude for saving the life of Kim Yun-chan's grandmother, as always answering that he only did what he had to. Unexpectedly, the elderly woman said that it was a bit hot in the ward, so she would like to take a walk in the fresh air. Soon the doctor and his patient were walking around the hospital grounds. Grandma Kim apologized again for what happened and asked the boy not to be embarrassed in front of her. She casually revealed that Congressman Bando was her adopted son. The main character was very surprised by what he heard, as if he could not believe that such a thing was possible. An elderly woman said that during the retreat on January 4th, she crossed the border into South Korea on her own. Since then, she has been involved in various activities and has amassed a lot of money by reselling food to the U.S. 8th Army. During that period, she began to notice many children who had things very badly in their lives. The old woman recalled that Bando was one of those children. She felt sorry for the child and eventually took him under her wing. She didn't like the fact that the congressman was stirring up the public just because he had achieved something, and she thought it would have been great if he had been able to do half of what the main character could do. Suddenly, the grandmother happily declared that Kim Yun-chan was too kind. She saw it in his eyes. The patient confidently said that her doctor's eyes shone more than all the others. The old woman believed that this was how the eyes of someone who saved many lives, including hers, should have looked. Suddenly, the old woman became more serious and, without joking, again thanked Kim Yun-chan for his kindness. She then went on to say that after a couple of days of examination at this hospital, she had an unpleasant feeling. It seemed to her as if this institution was not what it should have been. That is why Grandma Kim seriously thought about helping the main character. She was willing to become a sponsor for this hospital and therefore asked Kim Yun-chan to become her adopted son. Kim Yun-chan was very surprised when he heard Grandma Kim's proposal and, not believing what he heard, asked what she meant. The elderly woman thoughtfully replied that she liked kind and righteous people like Dr. Kim Yun-chan and a few other people in this hospital. However, she understood that people like the manager and director heard the situation and did not allow good people to use their skills. The elderly woman also claimed that despite her appearance, she still had some strength. That's why she could help the main character spread his wings in the future. After this, the grandmother asked again whether the main character was ready to become her adopted son. Kim Yun-chan, of course, thought that this was a very tempting offer. The protagonist was confident that his patient possessed impressive wealth and influence. Of course, Grandma Kim could easily help Kim Yun-chan achieve any of his goals. However, there was something that did not allow the guy to simply accept this generous offer. Unexpectedly, the main character bowed low to the elderly woman and asked her for forgiveness. Grandma Kim and Ji Seok were shocked and could not believe that the guy refused. Kim Yun-chan was grateful for the offer, but he already had a mother. The guy said that his father died early, so now his mother only had him and he didn't want to offend her. Ji Seok was deeply touched by this answer and simply could not contain his emotions. The main character felt awkward about this. In the end, the elderly woman resigned herself to the refusal and felt that in this case, nothing could be done. Kim Yun-chan thanked for understanding and said that he really felt sorry for refusing his grandmother. Suddenly, the main character heard a loud voice nearby. The woman was telling her uncle that he could be fired. Kim Yun-chan immediately realized who it was. Yunina asked the professor to overcome his stubbornness at least once, but Lee Sang-jun stood his ground and said that everything had been decided. In his opinion, it was at moments like these that someone had to step forward. Grandma Kim, hearing this conversation, asked with displeasure what all this meant. She couldn't believe that the brilliant surgeon who saved her life was about to be fired for performing an operation without pay. Kim Yun-chan immediately began to claim that this was not the patient's fault, and that the professor himself had done nothing wrong. Kim Yun-chan believed that the professor was simply doing his medical duty and did not pretend not to notice the stupid things that were happening before his eyes. The elderly woman heard all this and thought for a while looking intently at the main character. The guy felt his patient's gaze on him, and he realized that he had said too much. In order not to disturb his grandmother, Kim Yun-chan took her hand and smilingly explained that he was simply irritated by such moments when nothing could be done. Grandma Kim wasn't going to just let the topic go, so she asked if the boy was angry because he was powerless to do anything. Suddenly, the elderly woman declared that from now on, everything that her doctor could not do, she would do herself. The grandmother was ready to become a reliable support for the main character, so he no longer had to worry. Kim Yun-chan was impressed by these words and was ready to thank his patient, but he did not yet know what she would ask for in return. The next moment, the elderly woman asked that the protagonist become her adopted grandson. The guy was again taken aback by another unexpected proposal and didn't even know what to say to it. Grandma Kim thought that this was a great option, so the guy shouldn't even think about refusing, because the more grandmothers a person had, the better. Then the elderly woman with a smile on her face asked the main character to take care of her, calling him her kind grandson. Kim Yun-chan probably wanted to refuse the generous offer, but he quickly apologized for his decision. Smiling sincerely, the guy asked his grandmother to also look after him, as if he were her grandson. After this, the old woman immediately decided to demonstrate her abilities to the protagonist, and for this purpose asked Ji Seok to arrange a strategy meeting. Some time passed, only a few days remained until the meeting, but Kim Yun-chan and Professor Lee Sang-jung continued to work as usual. Although the boy felt impatient, as an inter, he could only assist the professor and spend his days trying to save patients. The main character completely trusted Grandma Kim and Secretary Kang and left everything to them. He was very interested in how his life would have turned out differently if he had had such strong support before the regression. One day, Kim Yun-chan came to visit his patient and upon entering the room, immediately asked how she was feeling. Grandma Kim didn't understand why the guy kept coming here despite the fact that he was very busy at work. Surprisingly, the main character's mother was also in the ward. It turned out that after the guy told his mother about Grandma Kim, she began to come to her in the hospital every day. The old woman insisted that Kim Yun-chan and his mother should not have come to her and wasted their time, but they did not listen to her. The grandmother also said that since the main character became her adopted grandson, the woman was now her adopted daughter. The guy did not expect at all that they would get along so quickly. Suddenly, the main character noticed that Secretary Khan had not been seen in the hospital for a long time. Grandma Kim, hearing this, smiled slyly and said that Ji Seok was very busy right now. Now the guy was carrying out a special task that was connected with the hospital director. Ji Seok, having transformed his appearance, one day came to the man, and in order to attract his attention, the first thing he did was praise his excellent hitting of the ball with his stick. The hospital director and his manager immediately turned to the guy to find out who he was. Ji Seok introduced himself without further questions. He then handed the man his business card and said that he was the new manager who had arrived that morning. The guy also said that from now on he would serve the director with all his might. Some time passed. Late in the evening, a long-awaited visitor came to the hospital. There was absolute silence all around, so nothing could interfere with the discussion of the important topic. Someone said that after the investigation, everything turned out exactly as expected. It was safe to assume that pharmaceutical companies were providing discounts. Ji Seok claimed that he had already collected all the necessary evidence, but he was still missing some important parts of the story. All this time, the main character was very interested in what the secretary was doing all this time, and finally receiving an answer, he was very surprised. Grandma Kim, after listening to the guy, asked if the villains were not as simple as expected. To this, the guy replied with a smile that the chairman didn't need to worry about this because he was none other than Kang Ji-suk. The elderly woman and Kim Yun-chan were surprised to hear this, because they did not understand what such a pompous phrase meant in this situation. Ji Seok said again that there was nothing to worry about because he had already found a clue that would lead them to this missing piece. However, for everything to work out, the guy needed Dr. Kim Yun-chan to fulfill one of his requests. That same evening, the main character went to wander the dark corridors of the hospital in order to fulfill this request. Very soon, the guy approached the hospital director's office where, of course, no one was there. Without fear, Kim Yun-chan went into the office and quickly looked around to find what he needed now. The guy easily found the very director's safe that Secretary Khan had told him about. Suddenly, the main character remembered that the director was a real idiot, which couldn't help but make him smile. It turned out that the other day, Ji Seok, whose skill in flattery and bragging had reached its maximum level, threw a small party for the director and manager. Ji Seok, of course, took advantage of. The guy discovered the hospital director's security password and learned that in order to open his safe, he had to periodically change direction. Now Kim Yun-chan was thinking that thanks to Secretary Kang, everything turned out to be much easier than he had expected. Suddenly, a man with a bright flashlight in his hands came into your director's office and loudly addressed the guy and asked what he was doing here. Kim Yun-chan was taken aback by what happened. He didn't expect something like this to happen. Now the guy didn't know what to do. When Kim Yun-chan's eyes got used to the bright light of the flashlight, he finally managed to make out the person who had caught him in this awkward moment. It turned out that this person was Dr. Yun-ina. She asked again what the main character was doing here. The guy understood that he was in big trouble now. He didn't know at all how to explain everything to him. Suddenly, Dr. Yun-ina addressed the main character in a serious voice, as if she already guessed why he was here. The next moment, the woman directly asked if Kim Yun-chang had come here to find the ledger. The guy was taken aback by this question and immediately asked how his colleague knew about this. Kim Yun-chan was being very loud due to the whole situation, so Dr. Yun-ina quickly made him understand that he shouldn't have been making noise. Then the woman, answering Kim Yun-chan's question, said that she came to this office for exactly the same reason as he did. Yun-ina found it strange that the director was suddenly able to buy himself a new car while constantly complaining about the hospital's debts. Doubts in such a situation were quite natural, so the woman had suspicions and of course they were confirmed. At the same time, the villains tried to blame everything and expel Professor Lee Sang-jun, which made Yun-ina very angry. Somehow the man became an obstacle to their plans. The woman continued to say that she simply could not allow her uncle to be fired from his job just like that. Barely containing her emotions, Yun-ina began to remember how the professor rejoiced in saving the lives of his patients. The woman simply could not stand by and watch as a great doctor was fired due to political squabbles within the hospital system. She understood that if this happened, Professor Lee Sang-jun would simply lose the meaning of his life. The woman wanted to fix this situation with all her might, but she didn't even have anything to start with. Kim Yun-chan felt very sorry for his colleague. In order to calm Yun-ina down, the guy took her hands and seemed to be preparing to give a motivational speech. The woman understood what would happen next, so wiping away her tears, she looked straight into the eyes of the main character, expecting to receive support from him. The next moment, Kim Yun-chan smiled widely and shone a bright light on his face to create the effect of a human flashlight. This made Dr. Yun-ying-yi both confused and angry. She couldn't understand how the guy could be fooling around when she was saying such serious things. Kim Yun-chan meekly endured the punishment for his prank, but in the end he noticed that Yun-ina now looked like the doctor he knew. The woman was still unhappy and did not understand who was comforting people in such a difficult situation. In response to this, the main character promised that he would protect Professor Lee Sang-jun. The guy exuded incredible confidence, so his words did not cause doubt. After that, Kim Yun-chan, in order not to waste any more time, got down to business. Nothing prevented him from doing what he came here for. The guy started fiddling with the combination lock on the hospital director's safe. The contents of this safe could have a big impact on the current situation. Dr. Yunina did not understand what the main character was planning because he did not explain anything and only asked the woman not to worry. The next day soon arrived, and the rays of the early sun awakened Sebastian Hospital and its staff. The hospital manager walked slowly through the corridors of the institution. Nothing worried him that morning. All the thoughts of the tired-looking man were occupied with regret that he had drunk too much yesterday. Nevertheless, he remembered the previous evening with a smile. He liked the new manager and the holiday he arranged for them. Soon the man arrived at the director's office because, no matter what, he needed to organize all the accounting before his boss arrived. The manager took out the same notebook with the password to the safe and began to slowly enter the correct combination, following all the instructions. The next moment, the iron door of the safe creaked open and revealed that there was absolute emptiness inside. The manager was so stunned by what he saw that for a while, he simply froze in place as if he couldn't believe it was real. Gradually, the man began to understand what had happened, and with each passing second, he began to get more and more nervous. In the end, all this resulted in a long and very loud scream that echoed throughout the entire hospital. Just at that moment, the hospital director appeared in the office. He asked his subordinate with displeasure why he had been making so much noise since early morning. The man asked the manager to understand that he had also drunk too much yesterday. As soon as the director saw the empty safe and the frightened manager, he immediately fell silent, causing an oppressive silence to fall in the office for some time. Finally coming to his senses, the director began frantically searching his safe and loudly asking where the ledger had disappeared to. The manager swore that the documents had definitely been in the safe until yesterday. This answer did not satisfy the director, so he accused the man of carelessness. Just at that moment, the director's phone started ringing. The man did not understand who could be calling him at such a time. Zhang wanted to contact him, Taesu. Before answering the call, the man threatened his subordinate that if he did not find the book, he would be in trouble. After this, the director answered the phone and, having greeted his senior management, began to talk about today's meeting. Suddenly, the man was interrupted by a loud shout from the CEO, who for some reason was scolding him loudly. Huang suddenly ran into the office, worried about something. Jin He turned to the director and said that he should immediately go into the corridor. The director was very unhappy with his subordinate and asked how she dared to behave like that, since he was currently talking on the phone. Immediately after the nurse, several more people entered the office, who came to report some not very happy news for the director. It turns out that these people were from the police. They were looking for Director Choi, Gu and manager Sagi Gyun. Both men were shocked by the appearance of the police because they did not understand what they wanted from them. Without wasting any time, one of the officers handcuffed the director's hands while saying that he had been arrested on charges of accepting bribes. The police also reported that the man had the right to remain silent, but the director continued to demand that he be released because the police did not dare arrest him without a warrant. The officer calmly replied that they of course had a warrant, as well as proof of the man's guilt, so he should have calmly gone with them. Already approaching the exit from the hospital, the director saw that the path was blocked by many reporters who wanted to find out all the details of the arrest. Journalists persistently asked whether the director admitted that he received kickbacks and whether he really kept double-entry bookkeeping, but he refused to comment on anything. Professor Lee Sang Jun, watching everything that was happening, was shocked because he didn't know all the details yet. At the same time, Yun Ina pretended that she also didn't know anything. Meanwhile, the hospital manager made excuses to journalists and said that he was only doing what the director told him to do. The man denied any unification. Grandma Kim watched all this from her hospital room with a satisfied smile on her face. She was very pleased that everything worked out as planned. After that day, the media rushed to publish a corresponding report regarding the arrest of the director, who was accused of bribery. Thanks to the witnesses, the investigation and trial proceeded very quickly. One of the witnesses said that the director repeatedly bragged about stealing money from the hospital. The second witness, who worked in the sales department of a pharmaceutical company, claimed that the director often demanded that luxury items be brought back from trips abroad. This was not the end of the story. A few days later, an expensive car parked near Sebastian's hospital, and several people in business suits got out. These people attracted the attention of patients and hospital staff as they walked through the corridors of the facility as if they were at home. Soon they flew away Professor Lee Sang-jun and his intern, who, despite everything, continued to work, not noticing the appearance of unusual visitors. Suddenly, one of the men turned to the professor to get his attention. The man immediately raised his head and looked at the stranger. The man in the business suit then asked whether his interlocutor was that same Professor Lee Sang-jun. Suddenly, one of the men turned to the professor to get his attention. The man immediately raised his head and looked at the stranger. The man in the business suit then asked whether his interlocutor was that same Professor Lee Sang-jun. The man confirmed this and immediately asked what was happening and what the strangers wanted from him. It turned out that they were people from the Human Resources Department of Yonhee University Medical Center. They were sent by the deputy director to discuss something with the professor. Some time passed. For some reason, Kim Yun-chan quickly ran to the break room as if he had heard incredible news and wanted to share it with his colleagues. Bursting into the room, the guy with a smile on his face asked if Professor Lee Sang-jun had really been appointed director of the hospital. This question shocked Dr. Yun-ying and her uncle. It seemed like they were hearing about this for the first time. Suddenly, the professor asked how the main character knew about this. It became clear that the rumors were not lying. Kim Yun-chan sincerely congratulated the professor. The guy was a little nervous when people from the medical center showed up at the hospital, but in the end, everything went well. Lee Sang-jun was grateful for the intern's congratulations, but he was still curious about how he had learned about his appointment so quickly. The man assumed that the reason for this was Yunina, but she claimed that she only told this good news to Nurse Hwang Jin-hee. A joyful Kim Yun-chan was about to answer the professor's question, but suddenly something interrupted him. Hwang entered the room. Jin-hee, without looking at those present, loudly declared that from that day on, Lee Sang-jun was appointed the new director of the hospital. The woman instantly fell silent when she saw the professor's displeased face. She realized that she had made a big mistake when she entered this room at the wrong time. After Professor Lee Sang-jun became the director of the hospital, the situation at the institution quickly stabilized. Kim Yun-chan and his mother continued to pay a lot of attention to Grandma Kim and were determined to take care of her until she fully recovered. Thanks to the new management, the hospital staff was able to devote themselves entirely to patients and perform their duties without any obstacles. Time passed, and before the main character realized it, his last day at the internship had arrived. On this day, Kim Yun-chan looked thoughtfully out the window and was surprised that snow had fallen so early in this province. The guy warned that the roads were frozen, so they had to be careful. Suddenly, the guy was interrupted by Ji Seok's voice, who was persistently asking Grandma Kim for something. The guy claimed that the elderly woman needed to wear thermal underwear because it was very cold outside. Despite this, the grandmother still refused to do so. Having no other choice, the secretary looked at the main character with pitiful eyes as if asking him for help. Kim Yun-chan responded to the call for help and began to explain to the stubborn old woman that she had not yet fully recovered, and therefore she needed to dress warmly and comfortably. In the end, Grandma Kim, although reluctantly, agreed to put on thermal underwear, believing that it really wouldn't be a hindrance during the walk. June came to his patient to say goodbye to her. The grandmother thanked the doctor for his work, and he, in response, advised his patient to take good care of her health even after discharge. The elderly woman also decided to give the man some advice and recommended that he stop worrying about his niece and think more about his own health. Professor Park Hwan, who suddenly appeared from behind, insisted that his colleagues should have listened to his grandmother's words. The elderly woman thought that it was time for her to leave, because if she stayed longer, she would be reminded a couple hundred more times about taking care of her health. Finally, the grandmother turned to the main character and asked him to definitely visit her. Kim Yun-chan promised that he would do so. The entire hospital staff had smiles on their faces as they said goodbye to yet another patient they had been able to help. After that, Nurse Hwang Jin-hee asked if today was the last day of the main character's internship. She said with regret that now the hospital would be empty. Director Lee Sang-jun tried not to show his emotions, so he said that Kim Yun-chan was not the last intern in this hospital, so everyone should quickly say goodbye and return to work. Without turning around, the man praised the guy for a good job and briefly said goodbye to him. Kim Yun-chan knew that the director was not being honest at that moment, so without holding back his emotions, he loudly thanked him for working together and said that he learned a lot from him. The guy also asked Lee Sang-jun not to be too sad about his departure. At that moment, the man stopped for a moment. Then he asked the main character not to make noise, because silence was needed in the hospital, and he hoped that the guy would not forget to call him. Kim Yun-chan, seeing the director off with his eyes, mentally thanked him once again for the time they spent together. He didn't notice at all that someone had already approached him from behind. It turned out that it was Dr. Yoon-ina, who also wanted to say goodbye to the intern. She was glad that the guy hadn't left yet because she wanted to give him something. Kim Yun-chan was very surprised by this. As a token of her gratitude, Dr. Yoon-ina decided to give the protagonist her medical records. She was sure that these notes would help the guy on the final exam, because the questions were similar every year. The main character was very happy that he was lucky enough to spend time in this hospital and believed that he would return here again. After some time, the young professionals arrived at the #1 testing center, where the Korean Medical Association qualification exam was about to take place. The main character also arrived for this exam. He was taking it for the second time, but he was still nervous. The guy was no less nervous when he and his friends waited for the test results. Soon, the long-awaited day arrived. Sebastian Hospital was ready to welcome new specialists. Everything was prepared so that yesterday's interns could work comfortably as certified doctors. Modern hospital wards were able to receive patients at any time and provide them with the necessary assistance. Kim Yun-chan passed the exam with flying colors and, as planned, officially became a cardiac surgeon. The quota for cardiac surgeons was only 4 people, but only 3 applied. Among them were, of course, Kim Yun-chan and his friend Lee Taek-jin. The third person was unknown to the main character, but now he was his colleague. It turned out that the third person was a girl named Han Jong, which immediately attracted a lot of attention to her. Han Sang Hun greeted his new colleagues with great joy and said that from now on they were all one family, so they imagined working well together. While the professor was giving his welcoming speech, Lee Taek-jin, who was blushing with embarrassment, couldn't take his eyes off Han Chan. That evening, our heroes went to a restaurant where a welcome party for newcomers was planned. Lee Taek-jin washed his hands thoroughly before eating while saying that he was very glad that he got to the thoracic surgery department. Kim Yun-chan was surprised by this because he had never noticed such an interest in this specialization in his friend. An embarrassed Lee Taek-jin quickly explained that the reason for his joy was their colleague Han Chan, who he liked right away. The guy didn't understand how the main character could not notice the beauty of this girl. According to him, she was a real angel who descended to this sinful earth. That's why Lee Taek-jin quickly got the idea to become Han Yeon's date at this party. Chan is her dark knight. However, very soon the guy's hopes were completely destroyed after what he saw. Everyone at the party was drunk and feeling unwell, but for Lee Taek-jin, that wasn't the worst thing. It turned out that Han Yeon-chan felt great and continued to order food and alcohol, which made it clear that she didn't need any dark night. Despite the fact that the party lasted until late at night, the next day our heroes arrived at work. After completing a short training, each newcomer finally took on his first patient as a treating physician. Kim Yun-chan carefully studied his patient's chart while feeling strange feelings. The guy assumed that it was because he had not performed the duties of a treating physician for a long time. Despite the good mood at the beginning of the working day, very soon the main character made a mistake, because of which he now bowed low and asked for forgiveness. Kim Yun-chan was very nervous and did not understand how he could have made such a stupid mistake. Kim Yun-chan carefully studied his patient's chart while feeling strange feelings. The guy assumed that it was because he had not performed the duties of a treating physician for a long time. Despite the good mood at the beginning of the working day, very soon the main character made a mistake because of which he now bowed low and asked for forgiveness. Kim Yun-chan was very nervous and did not understand how he could have made such a stupid mistake. This morning began quite normally for the main character despite his new status. Young Gi-soo, who had been an intern at the hospital for 3 years, was dissatisfied with something. His current state was clearly still influenced by yesterday's party. The man handed Kim Yun-chan the patient's hospital card and asked him to carefully study it and give his assessment, since he needed to describe the entire situation to the relatives. Lee Taek-jin also got his patient. The man asked the guy to carefully monitor the patient's condition because he might try to secretly drink alcohol when he had the opportunity. After that, Young Gi-soo sighed heavily and began to ask himself why he was appointed as the senior one over the newcomers. He didn't like this role at all. Finally, the man asked our heroes to do everything right and not spoil anything so that he would not have to worry. As soon as the man left the office, Lee Taek-jin began to be indignant that such an unpleasant person had received patronage over them. Kim Yun-chan agreed with his friend. Unexpectedly, Han Yeon-chan, who was also in the office but did not attract attention to herself, agreed with her colleague's words. The girl assumed that it would be better for them if Jung Gi-soo remained the same dried-up roach as he was yesterday during the party. Han Yeon-jong joked that now the man unfortunately looked very fresh like salmon Lee Taek-jin, and Kim Yun-chan could not hold back their laughter upon hearing this. Then the main character said that the girl showed herself really cool yesterday and therefore suggested that they have a drink together sometime. Han Yeon-chan wasn't at all against this proposal. Suddenly, the guy realized that he and his colleagues had finally received their long-awaited first patients, so he suggested celebrating it. The young professionals agreed to this and immediately placed their palms on top of each other. Full of enthusiasm, our heroes suddenly raised their hands and wished each other a good working day. After some time, the main character was already walking along the hospital corridor, carefully studying the hospital chart of his patient. At this time, the inconsolable relatives of one of the patients humbly waited for the doctor to find out the latest news. Seeing the married couple, Kim Yun-chan turned to them, believing that these were exactly the people he needed now. Coming closer to the man and woman, the main character asked if they were Ha-yoon's guardians, to which he received a positive answer. The guy assumed that they were his patient's grandparents, which caused awkwardness among his interlocutors. Soon they explained that they were the parents of a girl who was in one of the rooms. Kim Yun-chan began to get very nervous and blame himself for making such a stupid mistake. Realizing this, the guy immediately began to bow low and ask for forgiveness for his rudeness. The patient's father began to calm the doctor and say that everything was fine. His wife went on to say that they often encountered such misunderstandings. The woman recalled that it was difficult for her to give birth to a child, and before that she had multiple miscarriages. After this, the man asked the main character what the test results were and how bad everything was. After a short pause, Kim Yun-chan replied that Ha-yoon had a congenital heart defect and was now suffering from the so-called Fallow's notebook. This was a ventricular septal defect, pulmonary artery stenosis, right ventricular hypertrophy, and aortic dominance. In the tetrad phalate, these 4 diseases existed simultaneously. The guy continued to say that now the patient had a blocked pulmonary artery, and in addition to this, there was a hole in the wall between the right and left ventricles, so urgent surgery was needed. The patient's mother was so upset by what she heard that she could not contain her emotions and began to cry loudly. The man immediately asked Kim Yun-chan if their daughter would survive if they gave permission for the operation. It was a very difficult question, so the guy answered without hiding anything that the chances of success were not very great. However, the protagonist also insisted that there was nothing impossible in this operation. That is why he asked his patient's relatives, with a smile on his face, not to worry too much. The guy assured that their professor would definitely cure the girl. These words calmed the relatives a little and gave them hope. The patient's father thanked Kim Yun-chan for his work and asked him to take care of his daughter. The guy promised that he would do everything in his power. After this, the main character began to go about his business, saying in the end that they would see each other again when there was news. At that moment, a man appeared around the corner whom Kim Yun-chan did not expect to meet at all. This man approached the guy, making it clear that he wanted to talk to him about something. Turning back, the main character saw Han Sang Hun, who with a smile on his face offered him to have coffee together. Soon the guy was buying himself coffee from a vending machine. Of course, he couldn't refuse the professor a conversation. Han Sang Hun claimed that this coffee was an acquired taste, so they could go to the staff room and make a good drink, but Kim Yun-chan said that everything was fine. The man then went on to say that the life of a doctor was not easy, because they had to be constantly on the alert, and normal sleep and food were considered a luxury for them. The guy briefly replied that he was prepared for this, so he didn't complain. Han Sang Hun was pleased with this answer and praised his interlocutor for his good mood. After this, the man decided to get to the heart of the matter and said that he heard the main character explain the whole situation to Ha-yoon's parents. He praised the guy for understanding the composition of the disease well and explaining everything perfectly. Kim Yun-chan, as always, responded that the professor had overpraised him. Of course, this was not all that Han Sang Hun wanted to say. There was one very important question that he wanted to know the answer to. The man asked why the main character was so sure that the girl's illness could be treated and what he would do if something unexpected happened. Han Sang Hun claimed that there was no 100% guarantee in surgery, especially given the patient's current condition. The main character should have known about this because he himself read the girl's medical record, and he knew that Ha-yoon's mother suffered from rubella, which could have been the cause of heart disease. The professor continued to say that caregivers and patients had the right to receive an accurate explanation of their condition, so it was necessary to share all the facts with them without hiding anything. All this was necessary just in case to avoid possible problems. Kim Yun-chan knew this very well. Despite this, the main character simply could not tell everything when he saw the frightened faces of his patient's relatives. Ha-yoon's parents were already shocked, so the boy at that moment thought that he shouldn't add to their burden. Hearing this, Han Sang Hun said that Kim Yun-chan was too emotional, so he wanted to give him some advice. The man believed that it was better for doctors not to get too close to patients and caregivers, especially in thoracic surgery, where patient mortality was common. It was very easy to break down in such conditions. The main character was grateful to the professor for this advice, but he had a different opinion about all this. The guy said that despite everything, Professor Goem was still alive and well. He wanted to become the same brilliant doctor with a kind heart. The main character also believed that if he continued to strive forward, then even in cases like Ha Yun's, nothing was impossible, especially while Professor Goem was nearby. From these words, Han Sang Hun understood that the guy was not yet aware of the latest changes, so he said that he would be performing Ha Yun's operation, not Professor Goem. Noticing the surprise on the guy's face, the professor asked if he was disappointed. Kim Yun-chan, holding himself in check, replied that he simply had different information. After this, the man suggested that the main character return to work. The guy followed the professor, continuing to think about what he had just heard. Unexpectedly, Han Sang Hun asked the boy to be sure to inform Ha Yun's parents about the rubella. Kim Yun-chan had to obey. The main character couldn't stop thinking about the fact that it would be Han Sang Hun who would operate on his patient. This didn't make the guy happy at all. Kim Yun-chan had a bad feeling that he was working on until late in the evening. Only after finishing work, the guy was able to turn to Professor Gohamu in order to talk to him. But now the man was a little busy. Having studied the information received, the professor suddenly hit the table with his fist and turned to Chung Ji-soo and asked what he was thinking about. At this moment, Kim Yun-chan had already approached the office door and immediately heard unintelligible voices. As soon as the main character knocked on the door, Professor Goem's loud voice was heard from the office, who claimed that someone was not yet ready to perform the operation. Kim Yun-chan was very surprised by what he heard. He didn't know who exactly was being talked about, but he couldn't just ignore what was said. Having studied the information received, the professor suddenly hit the table with his fist and turned to Chung Ji-soo and asked what he was thinking about. At this moment, Kim Yun-chan had already approached the office door and immediately heard unintelligible voices. As soon as the main character knocked on the door, Professor Goem's loud voice was heard from the office, who claimed that someone was not yet ready to perform the operation. Kim Yun-chan was very surprised by what he heard. He didn't know who exactly was being talked about, but he couldn't just ignore what was said. Soon after, the office door opened, and a very disgruntled Young Gi-soo began to emerge. The man roughly pushed the protagonist aside and asked him to clear the way for him. Following him was Lee Taek-jin. For some reason, he looked depressed, but the guy was in no hurry to explain anything. Only after this was Kim Yun-chan able to enter the office and address the professor. He wanted to talk to the man about Ha Yun's operation, so the first thing he asked was if it was true that the surgeon had been changed and that Han Sang Hun would now be performing the operation. As soon as the professor heard that the guy doubted his colleague, he immediately frowned. He didn't like the fact that the newcomer was speaking so arrogantly about an experienced specialist. Kim Yun-chan began to justify himself and say that this was not what he meant at all, but Goham had a different opinion. The man continued to say that he recognized the protagonist's skills, but that did not mean that he could act so arrogantly. The professor loudly demanded that Kim Yun-chan know his place and not dare to doubt others. After these words, the main character was completely depressed, so all he could do was lower his head and ask for forgiveness. Having calmed down a little, the professor asked the guy not to think about what had not touched him, but instead to take care of Ha Yun until the day of her operation. The main character realized that he had been frivolous and had acted too hastily, which meant that now he needed to act differently. After that, the guy slowly walked along the quiet corridors of the hospital, thinking about everything that happened to him that day. Suddenly, in one of the wards, he saw his colleague, who seemed to be crying, leaning over the bed of a small patient. It turned out that it was Lee Taek-jin. He was really upset about something. The main character was very surprised when he saw his friend here in such a state. Immediately, Kim Yun-chan turned to his friend and asked what he was doing there. The guy replied that he was letting little Ha Yun heal his wounded heart. He then asked the main character not to interfere with him, but he replied that everything that concerned his patient was his responsibility. The guy assumed that his friend was upset because Professor Goem yelled at him. Lee Taek-jin's tears and loud crying confirmed this. Kim Yun-chan immediately asked his friend to be quiet and not wake the child, but the child wanted to be heard. Lee Taek-jin complained that his patient was driving him crazy. He didn't understand why a man with a heart attack continued to drink alcohol right before the operation. According to the guy, Professor Gokum threatened to kick this patient out if he drank again. At that moment, the man could be compared to a hydra that, having gotten out of control, began to breathe fire. Lee Taek-jin was very upset that he was yelled at because he couldn't watch the patient around the clock. Suddenly, the guy took the main character by the hands, as if he was going to ask him for something. Lee Taekjin insisted that his friend got along well with old people and wanted him to spend time with his patient. The guy begged Kim Yun-chan to help him because he himself no longer knew what to do. Kim Yun-chan, of course, didn't want to do this, but in the end he agreed to help his colleague just so that he would leave him alone. At that moment, someone entered the room and was very surprised to see doctors there at such a late hour. It turned out that it was Ha-yoon's mother. She was interested in what our heroes were doing here. Kim Yun-chan explained that he came because he needed to tell the woman something. The patient's mother immediately tensed up and asked what was the matter. The main character felt a little uncomfortable talking here, so he suggested that the woman go somewhere else for a while. Soon Kim Yun-chan brought the woman to the hospital cafe, which was already empty at that time of day. Before starting a conversation on a serious topic, the guy treated his interlocutor to hot coffee, which the tired woman simply needed right now. Suddenly, the patient's mother began to blame herself for her daughter being admitted to the hospital. Kim Yun-chan thought that everything would turn out this way. The guy had to calm the woman down and ask her not to blame herself, because after all, she didn't get rubella on purpose. The main character then said that in his opinion, the correlation was small or even non-existent. Kim Yun-chan, with a smile on his face, asked the woman to believe him and not pay attention to his appearance because he was a very competent doctor. A moment later, the guy realized that he had gone too far in his statements and now he felt a little awkward. Despite this, the patient's mother thanked the protagonist and said that she already felt a little better. Suddenly, something caught Kim Yun-chan's attention and he just couldn't stop thinking about it. The guy noticed the woman's little finger and remembered that his patient's was just as long and neat. The woman said that it was hereditary in their family. Yoon's grandmother had the same little finger. Because the grandmother was spoken of in the past tense, the main character realized that she was no longer alive. The woman immediately said that her mother did not survive the operation and died last year, despite the fact that, according to doctors, there were no major risks for her. That is why the patient's mother was now very worried about her daughter. Kim Yun-chan remembered that his patient's grandmother died during the operation. In order to encourage the woman, the guy confidently stated that they would definitely make more efforts, so there was no need to worry. Then the main character, as always, with a smile on his face, said that he was very talented. This amused the woman. Some time passed. The day before the operation, Kim Yun-chan went to see anesthesiologist Song Han-soo to discuss all the details. The man carefully looked through the documents and concluded that the patient had no problems with oxygen saturation and her liver. The main character warned that the child's physical condition was weaker than expected. This especially concerned the heart, so the guy was worried whether general anesthesia was suitable for this case. Song Han-soo understood his colleague's worries, but it was impossible to perform such an operation without general anesthesia. In order to cheer up the main character, the anesthesiologist put his hand on his shoulder and asked the guy not to worry, because general anesthesia was not as dangerous as it seemed. Unexpectedly, Song Han-soo stated that if the patient had had MH, the situation would have been completely different. Kim Yun-chan immediately paid attention to these words. The guy knew what ZG was, but the man still said that malignant hypertension was a complication that could occur with general anesthesia. The patient's temperature suddenly rose, fever began, and muscle spasms began. All this progressed very quickly, so delay could lead to the patient's death. Song Han-soo claimed that something like this happened extremely rarely, so the main character shouldn't worry. The man also said that in case of unforeseen circumstances, their department regularly purchased medicines. Kim Yun-chan still asked why this malignant hypertension had arisen. Song Han-soo replied that the exact reasons were still unknown, but genetic factors could have played an important role in this. These words touched the main character. He immediately remembered that his patient's grandmother had died last year, right during the operation. Realizing this, the guy suddenly jumped up and quickly said goodbye to Song Han-sun, saying that he had some personal business to attend to. After this, the main character ran out into the corridor and headed towards his patient's room. Running closer and closer, Kim Yun-chan saw Ha-yoon's father, who had just come to visit his daughter. The man was very surprised when he saw a worried doctor who clearly wanted to talk to him about something. He immediately asked what was the matter and why the guy was running so fast. Kim Yun-chan, trying to catch his breath, replied that he had an urgent question. Without wasting any time, Kim Yun-chan explained that he wanted to talk about Ha-yoon's maternal grandmother, who died during surgery. The man became alarmed upon hearing this. The guy understood that it could have been rude on his part, but he wanted the man to tell him in more detail about what happened. Of course, it was hard for the man to remember all this, but he began to tell that his mother-in-law had a herniated disc in the lumbar region. After going to the hospital, the hernia was corrected, but the grandmother's condition still worsened every day. After some persuasion, she agreed to the operation. It was supposed to be a routine operation without much risk, but it ended tragically for the family. The man was so angry that he filed a lawsuit against the hospital where the surgery was performed. But no matter how hard he tried, the hospital refused to provide the relevant records, so he had to contact a lawyer. The record stated that for an unspecified reason, a fever, high temperature, and muscle spasms developed during the operation. The cause of death was eventually determined to be cardiac arrest. The protagonist immediately realized that it was malignant hypertension. At that time, the man was so angry that he filed a lawsuit against the hospital where the operation was performed. But no matter how hard he tried, the hospital refused to provide the relevant records, so he had to contact a lawyer. The record stated that for an unspecified reason, a fever, high temperature, and muscle spasms developed during the operation. The cause of death was eventually determined to be cardiac arrest. The protagonist immediately realized that it was malignant hypertension. Suddenly, the man asked why the doctor was interested in all this and suggested that there was some problem. Kim Yun-chan immediately replied that he was simply checking the family's medical history, which was a routine procedure. The guy also said that Ha-yun was very young and weak, so the professor asked him to be more attentive. This explanation calmed the man down. After this, the main character, having decided that he should no longer disturb the relatives of his patient without reason, began to leave. The guy reassured himself that, according to the anesthesiologist, the hospital always had a muscle relaxant in stock that could help with malignant hyperthermia. Without wasting time, Kim Yun-chan decided to check whether the drug was really in the warehouse, because if it was, then there would be no problem. The next moment, the main character discovered that, judging by the documents, there was currently no muscle relaxant in the hospital. The guy was very worried that in the event of an unforeseen situation, none of the doctors would be able to do anything. He didn't even want to think about what would ultimately happen to Ha-yun. Kim Yun-chan was sure that in such a situation, it was too risky to perform the operation, so he intended to contact his colleagues right away and convince them to refuse the surgical intervention. The first thing the main character did was call Han Sang Hun and say that he had an urgent question that was related to Ha-yun's operation. The man was ready to listen to his interlocutor. Then Kim Yun-chan said that their patient's grandmother died during surgery due to malignant hyperthermia. The guy expressed his concerns that Ha-yun could have the same complication, so he suggested postponing the operation just in case, but the man clearly didn't like this. Discouraged and a little angry, Han Sang Hun thought that his interlocutor was telling him some fairy tales. The guy did not expect such a reaction at all, and meanwhile the man asked with displeasure how the main character could even diagnose malignant hyperthermia based only on the words of the guardian. In addition, he really didn't like the fact that the newbie was suggesting that the specialist postpone the operation, and therefore insisted that only he could make such a decision. After this, Han Sang Hun stated without hesitation that he would carry out the operation as planned. Kim Yun-chan tried to object, but the man had already ended the call. The main character was very angry that the man did not listen to him, but he could not do anything about it. Suddenly, an idea came to the guy's mind that could change this situation for the better. Kim Yun-chan clearly remembered that his patient's father had mentioned records during a recent conversation that he had only been able to obtain through a lawyer. These documents most likely recorded the exact diagnosis. Hun couldn't ignore this, so he quickly headed to his patient's relatives. At this time, Ha-yun's father and mother were in their little daughter's room. They were both very worried because tomorrow, a complicated operation would be performed, which would come to the future for their daughter. Ha-yun's mother was afraid that something might go wrong during the operation, like what happened to her mother. The man is sure that it was an accident. Besides, they were now in another hospital where the doctors were much more attentive. Just at that moment, the alarmed protagonist ran into the room and loudly addressed the relatives of his patient, which greatly surprised them. Yoon's father didn't understand what was going on, and then Kim Yun-chan explained that they absolutely needed to talk about something before the operation. The guy started saying that until he was 100% sure, he intended to be careful and therefore decided to talk to the girl's parents. The next moment, the protagonist stated that in his opinion, it was best to postpone Ha-yun's operation for now. This statement shocked the man and his wife. The guy then said that thanks to the conversation with the man, he realized that Ha-yun's grandmother died during the operation due to high-grade hyperthermia. Kim Yun-chan explained that this complication arose due to the effects of anesthesia, and the predisposition to such a complication was inherited. Considering how similar Ha-yun was to her grandmother, The guy thought there was a chance that his patient could also have a similar reaction to the anesthesia. Kim Yun-chan tried to calm his relatives down and explained that this did not mean that the operation could not be carried out. It was simply necessary to conduct an investigation and prepare better. The main character also said that they needed documents regarding the death of Ha Yun's grandmother. Upon hearing this, the girl's parents immediately hesitated. The next moment, the man stated that they destroyed all the documents after they lost in court because they could no longer look at them. This shocked the protagonist. However, the guy quickly reacted and asked if the lawyer could have copies of these documents. Ha Yun's mother thought that this was possible. The man then immediately began calling the lawyer's office, but the number he dialed was no longer in service. This was very disappointing news for Kim Yun-chan, but he knew that he couldn't just wait for the problem to resolve itself. Suddenly, the guy asked where the lawyer's office was. He was ready to go to him right then and there. After some time, the taxi was already driving along the evening streets of a large metropolis, intending to arrive at its destination as quickly as possible. Luckily, the driver didn't make a mistake with the address and brought Kim Yun-chan to that very law firm. Getting out of the car, the main character was first very surprised when he saw the workers of the transport company, who were quickly putting boxes into their truck. One of the workers sighed heavily and complained that moving the law office was a real hassle, because now they had to drag around a whole mountain of papers. Kim Yun-chan felt a bolt of shock as he realized that these workers were actually transporting the law firm he needed. The main character thought that this was a big problem because in that case, they could destroy all the documents. Without wasting time, the guy ran to look for that very lawyer. Kim Yun-chan quickly made his way through the room filled with boxes, mentally hoping that it wasn't too late. Having gone into another room, the guy unexpectedly discovered a man in it who was collecting his things. Kim Yun-chan immediately assumed that it was that same lawyer. Without even having time to catch his breath, the protagonist turned to the man and asked if he was the lawyer Jun. The discouraged man confirmed this. He was even more surprised when he learned that the guy standing in front of him was a cardiologist surgeon from Sebastian Hospital. Lawyer Jun was about to bring the guy some water, but he abruptly stopped the man and asked if he remembered the case against the hospital regarding the death of a patient a couple of years ago. The man replied that he had many such cases, so he needed to know which particular case the main character had in mind. Kim Yun-chan said that this was a case where an elderly woman died during spinal surgery, and subsequently, a lawsuit was filed against the hospital. It seemed that the lawyer immediately understood what exactly was being discussed. The guy also said that the daughter of the woman who filed that lawsuit would be undergoing surgery tomorrow, so he needed to check the death certificate. Kim Yun-chan, I will explain that all the papers were destroyed, so we couldn't get through to the lawyer. He came in person. Then the main character asked if the man still had documents on that case. At this point, for some reason, Jun's lawyer looked very depressed. Finally, the man made it clear that he understood what case Kim Yun-chan was asking him about. The guy really hoped for success. Some time passed. The other participants in this story were spending a carefree evening in an expensive establishment. In addition to a large number of exquisite dishes, there was also expensive traditional alcohol on the table, which was drunk from small cups. The director asked Han Sang Hun whether the operation on the Fallet's notebook was scheduled for tomorrow, and asked his interlocutor to try not to worry anymore about being promoted to professor. The director of Sebastian's hospital, whose name was Jian Tai-su, however, believed that since it was specifically Han Sang Hun that was being discussed, there was nothing to worry about. The man was grateful to the director for this praise and promised that he would do everything in his power. Hun's phone rang in his pocket. The man really didn't like the fact that he was being disturbed at such an inopportune moment. Han Sang Hun apologized to the director and explained that it was a call from the hospital and went into another room. It turned out that at such a late hour, the man received a call from Professor Goem, who wanted to talk about Ha Yun's operation scheduled for the following morning. Suddenly, the man said that due to some circumstances, this operation would have to be postponed. Han Sang Hun was shocked by what he heard and did not understand what was going on. The professor explained that this decision was influenced by the fact that Ha Yun's grandmother died during surgery from malignant hyperthermia. Han Sang Hun, who could barely contain his anger, immediately realized that Kim Yun-chan had told the professor about this and therefore began to ask him not to believe the words of some newbie. To this, Professor Goem replied that the main character had accepted the documents about Grandma Ha Yun's operation, and having studied them, it became clear that the guy's fears were not unfounded. In addition, the man recalled that when he ordered a replenishment of dantrolene, it was Han Sang Hun who volunteered to check these supplies. This meant that the man knew very well that this medicine was not in stock. Han Sang Hun immediately tried to justify himself, but the professor did not allow him to do so. Instead, the man asked in a rough voice how, knowing all this, Han Sang Hun was going to perform the operation and put the patient's life in danger. Han Sang Hun had no choice but to hold back his anger and ask for forgiveness for his mistake. After the professor gave a few more instructions to his colleague, this conversation took place. Immediately after that, Han Sang Hun exhaled heavily and began to think about Kim Yun-chan. The man was very angry at the main character and did not understand how he even dared to speak out against him while dragging Professor Goem into all this. Immediately after the phone call ended, Han Sang Hun exhaled heavily and began to think about Kim Yun-chan. The man was very angry at the main character and did not understand how he even dared to speak out against him while dragging Professor Goem into all this. He didn't like at all that the guy ignored him as a surgeon and handed the documents over to the professor. At this time, Kim Yun-chan just came out of Professor Goem's office. He was pleased that they listened to him and tomorrow's operation was canceled. Just at that moment, the phone in the protagonist's pocket rang. Someone wanted to urgently contact him. Kim Yun-chan was very surprised when he saw who exactly was calling him. The upcoming conversation did not make the guy happy at all. It turned out that after talking with Professor Goham, Dr. Han Sang Hun immediately called the main character. The angry man rudely asked the guy to come to his office tomorrow. Kim Yun-chan already understood that tomorrow's conversation would not be pleasant. The next day came and Sebastian Hospital was running like clockwork despite the personal problems and conflicts of the staff. From early morning, Kim Yun-chan, as ordered, arrived at Han Sang Hun's office, not at all afraid of the upcoming conversation. As the rules of decency required, the guy bowed respectfully to his interlocutor, despite the fact that he found him unpleasant. The main character understood that the reason why he was here now was connected with yesterday, however. He was ready for any outcome. The guy was sure that now Han Sang Hun, whom he knew well in his past life, would show his true face. After a short silence, the man finally turned to the protagonist and asked in a serious voice who he thought he was when he gave him advice and showed the death certificate to the professor and not to the surgeon in charge. Hun then asked if the guy really intended to ignore the rules while working with him. Kim Yun-chan immediately began looking for excuses, but the man did not listen to him. Unexpectedly, he announced that in his opinion, the guy had decided to share the den with the lion. Now the man was interested in whether the main character was sure that he was doing the right thing. The doctor warned the young specialist that one day the hyenas waiting could grab the old sick lion by the throat. Hearing this, the protagonist assumed that the man planned to use Professor Goem and then get rid of him when he became unnecessary. Kim Yun-chan, of course, did not agree with this arrangement, so he decided to express his true opinion to his interlocutor. The next moment, Kim Yun-chan confidently declared that although he was young, he was also a lion and therefore could easily finish off a couple of hyenas. Having finally said this, the main character thought that it was even for the best because, sooner or later, he and Han Sang Hun would have come to this open confrontation anyway. Several days passed. During this time, Professor Goham carefully monitored Ha Yun's examination. The operation was only permitted after various tests had been carried out and the supply of dantrolene had been replenished. This operation was carried out personally by Professor Goem. Thanks to many factors, and especially the persistence of Kim Yun-chan, everything went well. During the operation, the professor was assisted by Han Sang Hun and Kim Yun-chang. There was a clear tension between them the entire time. However, all this was not in vain, and the results were not long in coming. During the follow-up examination, the protagonist was very surprised at how much his little patient's grasping reflexes had improved. After this, the guy happily informed the girl's mother that although this operation was very serious, the child recovered well. The woman was incredibly grateful to the doctor, but he insisted that it was Professor Goem who should be thanked, as he had done an excellent job. The main character also said that yesterday he contacted that same lawyer and told him this good news. The man was so happy as if it was all his doing. Suddenly, a familiar, cheerful voice was heard in the ward, interrupting the conversation between the woman and the doctor. It turned out that Lee Taek-jin entered the room. He immediately asked how Ha Yun was doing. Kim Yun-chan didn't understand why his friend kept coming here, because this girl wasn't even his patient. Lee Taek-jin replied that it didn't matter. Then the woman decided to leave the room to call the lawyer and express her gratitude to him. The main character promised that they would look after Ha Yun. After this, Kim Yun-chan turned to his friend and asked him to pass him a napkin. Looking at Lee Taek-jin, who was about to pay, the guy felt a sense of déjà vu and immediately understood what had happened. The protagonist asked if his colleague was having problems with the patient again. Lee Taek-jin, who could no longer contain his emotions, confirmed this. Sometime later, while walking through the hospital corridors, the guy said that his patient asked to lend him a doctor's coat to go get some alcohol. Lee Taek-jin believed that if Professor Goem heard this, he would have kicked out both the patient and his attending physician, Kim Yun-chan, who was called by this story. Lee Taek-jin was not in the mood for laughing, so he again began to beg the main character to talk to his patient. The guy promised that he would do it, but did not guarantee anything. Suddenly, our hero's conversation was interrupted by an inexplicable noise that sounded nearby. This caught the attention of the boys, so they listened to understand what was happening. Soon, an alarmed nurse ran out of one of the rooms and, seeing the doctors, asked them for help. She said that the collectors who came to the patient Kim Chan-ho created a real commotion in the ward and scared everyone. One of the collectors claimed that if they owed money for treatment in this hospital, then he could also pay them back for a long time. Kim Chong-ho asked to give him a few more days to sort everything out. The scoundrel, of course, had no intention of giving the debtor any time off, and therefore swung his fist to teach him a lesson for violating the terms of their agreement. At that moment, Kim Yun-chan appeared out of nowhere and grabbed the man's hand tightly, stopping him while demanding that he stop causing a commotion here. The guy insisted that the scoundrels were scaring the patient, so they should get out of here. In response, the collector asked the doctor not to interfere because they wouldn't leave here anyway until they got the money. It seemed that all this would not be resolved peacefully, but soon help came to the hospital workers and patients. It turned out that Han Yan. During the commotion, Chan managed to call the hospital security for help, and now the scoundrel will definitely have to leave with nothing. The collectors made excuses and said that they simply came for their money. But the girl believed that it was still illegal and threatened to call the police. In the end, the scoundrels had to leave. But at the end they threatened that if the debtor did not pay this week, he would greatly regret it. Only when the villains left, Han Yan-jong exhaled with conviction, joy that she managed to do everything on time. Kim Yun-chan thanked his colleague for his help. After this, the main character turned to Kim Jong-hong to ask how he felt after what happened. But even without words, it was clear that something was wrong with the man. With each passing second, he became worse and worse, and eventually he couldn't sit still and fell to the floor, which greatly alarmed Kim Yun-chan. Despite all this suddenness, the young specialist knew what he had to do, and therefore did not waste time on empty thoughts. Using a small flashlight, the guy quickly performed an examination and discovered that the patient's eyes did not respond to light. At that moment, Lee Taek-jin informed his friend that the man's blood pressure was 60 to 30, and his oxygen saturation was only 51%. A value below 80% was already a reason for resuscitation, which is why Kim Yun-chan and his colleagues needed to urgently increase the oxygen content in the man's blood so that his brain would not be damaged. Before Han Young could do anything, Chan informed the protagonist that the patient's blood pressure was fluctuating sharply, which was similar to ventricular tachycardia. Hearing this, Kim Yun-chan, who understood what all this threatened, asked that he be given a defibrillator immediately. The girl immediately tied a cart with the necessary equipment to Kim Yun-chan. While preparing the device for work, the guy asked Han Yan-chan set the power to 200 joules. As soon as the young specialist applied the defibrillator to the patient's chest, he gave the command, "Discharge." From the strong electric shock, the patient's body jerked violently for a second. After this, Kim Yun-chan asked what was wrong with the man's blood pressure. Lee Taek-jin replied that it was completely absent. Then the main character decided to increase the power of the defibrillator to 300 joules. Han Yan-chan quickly set the desired value. Kim Yun-chan gave the necessary command again, after which Kim Jong-ho's body jumped convulsively. The defibrillator did not help improve the patient's condition, so the doctor began to massage his heart. Along with this, the main character carefully looked at the patient's indicators, mentally asking him to return from the other world. The defibrillator did not help improve the patient's condition, so the doctor began to massage his heart. Hanyeon. In this situation, all Chan could do was stay on the sidelines and hope for the best. Lee Taek-jin tried to put an oxygen mask on the patient, but his hands were shaking badly due to his excitement. Along with this, the main character carefully looked at the patient's indicators, mentally asking him to return from the other world. At some point, the device that was monitoring Kim Jong-ho's heartbeat made a loud sound, indicating that the man's heart had begun to beat. This made the young specialist very happy. The patient began to breathe independently, and his pulse was restored. Kim Yun-chan, due to all this commotion, didn't even notice how a person he knew well was closely watching his work. In someone's memories, A woman sat on the floor and cried bitterly, while a voice loudly said that he had been warned from the very beginning that everything could turn out like this. At this time, the young guy was angry and said that they had already suffered enough because of his father. The boy continued to quarrel and asked his father to stop dragging them down. At that moment, grandfather Kim Chung-ho began to open his eyes, and seeing the silhouette of a young guy in front of him, he believed that it was his son. The first thing he did was ask him for forgiveness. As soon as the old man's eyes got used to the light, he realized that it was not his son who was leaning over him, but a guy he did not know. Kim Jong-ho didn't understand what was happening, and so he asked if the guy was a doctor. Kim Yun-chan confirmed it and told the old man his name. Suddenly, the old man remembered that before he became ill, collectors came and demanded that he return the money. This made the elderly man jump up from his seat, which caused him severe pain. Kim Yun-chan, seeing this, asked the patient not to get up and remain calm. The guy also asked the old man not to worry about the debt collectors, but instead to focus on his recovery. For some reason, the main character confidently claimed that those scoundrels would not come here again. Kim Jong-ho was surprised by what he heard and asked what the doctor meant. A few hours before, a black expensive car pulled up to the main building of the hospital. Ji-suk insisted that Kim Yun-chan was very busy, and so it was not good that they came without notice. But Grandma Kim only wanted to see him. Just at that moment, the same scoundrels who demanded money from the old man were rushing to the exit of the hospital. One of them spat on the floor before leaving. Immediately after this, something caught the attention of the scoundrel. He didn't like what he saw very much. Ji-seok was looking at the man with disdain, not liking his behavior. However, the villain grabbed the guy's clothes tightly and asked why he was looking at him like that, assuming that Ji-seok was looking for trouble for himself. In response to this, the guy calmly asked if the scoundrel had just spat on the floor. The collector did not see any problem with this and was therefore ready to do it again. Then the guy made a remark to the man, saying that doing something like that in a public place was rude. The next moment, Ji-seok decided to teach the villain a lesson and used one of his moves to throw him to the floor. The second villain was unhappy that the guy attacked his friend and therefore decided to intervene in this conflict. Ji-seok was much faster than his opponent and was therefore able to deliver a crushing blow to him in a flash. Just a minute later, both villains were lying on the floor while Ji-seok was completely unharmed. Grandma Kim calmly asked if the guy had finished his business, as if everything that had just happened was ordinary for her. The elderly woman asked the guy not to complicate the situation and just scold the scoundrels and then return to her. At this time, all the villains had already arrived and wanted to take revenge on Ji-seok, who was already completely prepared for this. Soon, Grandma Kim went up to the right floor, and when she got out of the elevator, the first thing she saw was worried people running towards one of the wards. Following the people, the elderly woman saw Kim Yun-chan, who was fighting with all his might for the patient's life, and realized that her adopted grandson was really busy. Suddenly, she heard that some strange guys in jackets had recently come here and caused a commotion here because of money, which made the patient very ill. Grandma Kim immediately understood what kind of guys they were talking about and was very unhappy that they did whatever they wanted. The elderly woman was not ready to put up with this and so quickly took out her phone and entered the desired number. She called Ji-seok and calmly asked him to deal with those scoundrels seriously. After some time, the main character received a message from his grandmother, who said that those collectors would no longer come to the hospital. Despite everything that was said, Kim Chong-ho still believed that the collectors would not retreat and would definitely return. The old man also said that if the doctor did not want to buy him a drink, then he should have left. Kim Yun-chan replied that the elderly man was no longer allowed to drink alcohol, but he was willing to offer him an alternative. Unexpectedly, the main character suggested that the old man take a little walk in the fresh air. Soon the doctor took his patient outside where only the sound of the wind and the rustling of leaves could be heard. Kim Yun-chan was delighted with the wonderful weather and asked the old man if he was feeling better already. Kim Jong-ho immediately said that he would never give up alcohol, and therefore he wanted to end this useless chatter. To this, the guy asked if the old man knew how much effort he had put into saving him today. "Old man, what about you?" Of course he wasn't going to drink right now. Then Kim Yun-chan began to explain that the old man needed to stop drinking and get surgery quickly so that things wouldn't get worse. But Kim Jong-ho insisted that he didn't need surgery. In a sad voice, the elderly man also said that no one would be happy if he survived. Unexpectedly, the main character asked about the old man's son. Kim Jong-ho visibly tensed up when he heard the question about his son, but did not answer. "Kim Yun-chan, tell me that according to Dr. Lee Taek-jin, the old man often talked about his son when he was drunk." It was clear that this topic was quite painful for the old man, but he still decided to talk about it. Jung-ho sighed heavily and said that he and his son had not spoken for a long time. This old man once lived a righteous life and worked hard trying to provide for his wife and son. He managed to get his son into college and help him with his wedding. At that time, Kim Jong-ho could have been happy with his poor life, but he ruined everything because of one guy who got him involved in a stock deal. The shock of losing money and home led Kim Chung-ho's wife to have a heart attack, which caused her and her son to quarrel every time they met. The man's wife never woke up and his son broke off all ties with him before leaving, saying that he would move to Australia. Kim Jong-ho was unable to stop him. 10 years have passed since then, and it was then that the elderly man began to drown his sorrows in alcohol. Even if he didn't drink for one day, he would begin to be overwhelmed with pain from the fact that he had ruined everything. So the old man didn't understand why he needed an operation that would prolong his useless life. Unexpectedly, the main character replied that this was exactly why the patient needed this operation. The old man got angry when he heard this because he thought that the guy didn't hear him at all. But Kim Yun-chan understood that his interlocutor felt guilty and regretful. That's why he asked if Kim Jong-ho was willing to live and die in regret without even apologizing to his son. These words made the old man think. He didn't answer because he was trying to contain his emotions. The guy went on to say that the older man needed to have surgery, get better, and then talk to his son. Kim Yun-chan was sure that Kim Jong-ho's feelings would be able to reach his son because he began to understand life better and had already become a father himself. The main character promised that he would definitely help the old man Kim Jong-ho and thanked him for it with tears in his eyes. The feeling of regret that he had not taken good care of his mother in his past life still filled Kim Yun-chan's heart, and no matter how long he waited, these feelings would not go away. That is why the guy was obliged to intervene in this situation. He was sure that there was still a chance for a good relationship between the grandfather and his grandson. After some time, Lee Taek-jin learned about the conversation with Kim Jong-ho and was very surprised when he gave the main character his shares. Kim Yun-chan responded that in fact these shares were not worth more than the paper they were printed on, since they had lost a lot of value due to the crisis. Now the guy was determined to find out the current value of these shares, cash them out, and give the money to the old man no matter how much there was. Kim Yun-chan was very surprised when he saw a price with a lot of zeros, and for some time he couldn't even count how many there were. Suddenly the main character jumped up from his seat in shock because it turned out that the shares that Kim Jong-ho gave him were worth 5 billion won. Kim Yun-chan was very surprised when he saw a price with a lot of zeros, and for some time he couldn't even count how many there were. Suddenly the main character jumped up from his seat in shock because it turned out that the shares that Kim Jong-ho gave him were worth 5 billion won. Lee Taek-jin was very surprised by his friend's reaction, so he decided to look at the screen to see what was white. The guy's reaction was predictable. Suddenly he grabbed the main character by the hand and asked him to calm down, because now was not the time for that. Lee Taek-jin dragged the boy along with him and suggested that he immediately go to Kim Jong-ho and tell him everything. Soon after, the elderly man learned unexpected news. It was so unexpected for him that for some time he simply did not believe that it was true. Kim Yun-chan explained that the situation on the stock market had stabilized, and now the old man's shares were rapidly rising. Lee Taek-jin congratulated his patient with great joy and said that even winning the lottery was a trifle compared to this. Suddenly, Kim Yun-chan asked his friend to calm down. The guy didn't understand why he couldn't be happy for the old people. Jong-ho's cheek. He couldn't believe that everything turned out like this in the end. He was very sorry that this had not happened earlier, because then his wife would have been alive and he would not have lost his son. Despite the main character's attempts to calm Kim Jong-ho down, he continued to cry and say that he didn't need the money and that the doctors could take it for themselves. Kim Yun-chan was shocked by this statement and said that this money belonged to the old man and he could not accept it. Kim Jong-ho insisted and said that he didn't need them either. He felt sick just thinking about that money. The main character believed that the elderly man needed to use this money to pay off his debts and have an operation and then meet his son. Lee Taek-jin agreed with his friend and reminded the old man about his grandson, but Kim Jong-ho suddenly said that it was all useless. The elderly man explained that even if he wanted to meet with them, he would not be able to do so. Our heroes were very surprised because they did not understand what the patient meant. It soon turned out that Kim Jong-ho's son had severed all ties with him and gone abroad without leaving contact information, which was a big problem in the current situation. Lee Taek-jin and Kim Yun-chan racked their brains for a long time, not believing that she had forgotten to do anything until an old acquaintance appeared behind them. Kim Gi-dui Nam quietly crept up to our heroes and suddenly slapped them on the back while loudly greeting his friends. The guy began to ask with a smile how they were doing and regretted that although they worked in the same hospital, they saw each other quite rarely because they worked in different departments. Kim Gi-dui Nam immediately noticed that his friends looked unwell, so he assumed that they were going through hard times. In order to find out everything, the guy directly asked what happened. Our heroes had to tell everything. Kim Gi-dui Nam listened carefully from beginning to end and understood what the problem was. Suddenly he put his hands on the shoulders of his comrades and asked them not to worry. With great enthusiasm in his eyes, the guy promised that he would take on the solution to this problem himself. Lee Taek-jin and Kim Yun-chan were very surprised by this statement because they did not understand how their friend could help in this situation. Some time passed and no news was known until one day a meeting was organized in the hospital cafe. In addition to the doctors and the patient, a female lawyer recommended by Kim Gi-dui Nam was invited to the meeting. Thanks to her help, Kim Jong-ho was able to pay off all his debts and hospital bills. Kim Gi-dui Nam also handed the protagonist a small piece of paper on which very valuable information was written. After all the preparations were completed, an operation was carried out that was supposed to help Kim Jong-ho. It was during the operation that the main character decided to use the information that Kim Gi-dui Nam had obtained. The elderly man was in the operating room and had no idea what was waiting for him ahead. For a long time, the main character listened to the phone beeps and was very nervous until the very end, hoping that his call would be answered. Several weeks have passed since the operation, and Kim Jong-ho was finally allowed to go outside and get some fresh air. Lee Taek-jin was glad that his patient's recovery was going smoothly and persuaded that the old man would be discharged from the hospital in a few days. Kim Yun-chan reminded Kim Jong-ho that he no longer needed to drink alcohol. This time, the older man took the advice calmly. Also thank our heroes Kim Chan-ho for helping him, despite the fact that they could have simply taken the money, which he refused. Now the elderly man felt very well and could fully enjoy this wonderful day. The old man casually mentioned that it would be great to meet his son on such a fine day. Just at that moment, someone was already approaching from behind. Suddenly, the elderly man heard someone's voice addressing him and calling him father. At first, Kim Jong-ho thought he was just imagining it. However, the old man was shocked when he looked in the direction from which the voice came. It turned out that it was the voice of his grown-up son, whose name was Minguk. The elderly man immediately asked how he ended up there. Kim Yun-chan said the lawyer had connections with the Korean community in Australia, which is why she was able to track down Minguk. After this, Lee Taek-jin and Kim Yun-chan decided to leave so as not to interfere with the upcoming emotional conversation. Kim Jong-ho looked at his son through tears and still could not believe that he was standing in front of him. Minguk felt awkward and timidly asked if his father had had heart surgery. The old man also timidly confirmed it. Minguk, barely holding back his emotions, said that he heard that his father's health was undermined by alcohol, and then he had an attack when the collectors raised a fuss. While a warm tear was running down his cheek, Kim Jong-ho replied that he did not dare meet his son again. Suddenly, Minguk fell to his knees in front of his father and began to ask him for forgiveness. This really discouraged the old man. Kim Jong-ho began to argue that his son should not have apologized because he was not guilty of anything, but Minguk insisted that he was also wrong. At first, the man was offended by his father and wanted him to be unhappy for the rest of his life, but everything changed when he moved to Australia and started his own business. Every time he got tired, he thought about his father and how difficult it was for him. The man realized this when he found himself in his place. Now Minguk realized that everything he did for his children was a reflection of what Kim Jong-ho did for him as a child. Looking back, the man remembered with tears in his eyes how his father showed boundless care for him. Kim Jong-ho always tried to return early when his son was sick and sat next to him all night. And when Minguk was arrested in his younger years, he did everything to get him out. Mingkuku was grateful to his father, but he regretted that he had so cruelly rejected him at such a difficult moment. For this, the man had wanted to ask Kim Jong-ho for forgiveness for many years. Unfortunately, the man could not find his father for a long time after their last quarrel. He seemed to have disappeared, and so Minguk almost gave up. However, a few days ago, the man received a call from the hospital, and without wasting any time, he got a ticket for the next flight and flew here. Minguk believed that if he had done this earlier, his father would not have had to suffer alone. Minguk then invited his father to go with him to Australia after he was discharged from the hospital. Kim Jong-ho was touched by these words. He had been waiting for this moment for an incredibly long time. After a short silence, the elderly man knelt down and thanked his son, saying along the way that he was very sorry for everything that had happened. 3 months passed. The hospital continued its work as usual, and the staff worked hard to help everyone in need. One day, doctors received a photograph of Kim Jong-ho with his family. He was clearly doing well. Han Yun-chon was happy for this old man and didn't even worry about him because she knew that his son was very wealthy. Kim Yun-chon added that the elderly man even refused his money. While Lee Taek-jin was telling us that the old man had transferred all his money to a children's hospital before leaving the country, someone quietly approached our heroes from behind. No one noticed the presence of a stranger, so he simply had to turn to his colleagues. It turned out that it was Young Gi-soo. He was always sullen and dissatisfied with something, but today everything was different. Surely it was connected with the latest news. Our heroes were shocked by the mere sight of their boss and wanted to quickly find out what had happened.